Chapter 989. Now that I have nothing to do, I'm here to ask if you prefer a bald head or a bald head. Or do you have any other nice-sounding choices? Actually, I quite like a bald head and have even shaved it before. It's a pity that the shape of my head doesn't suit me. I'm deeply regretful. The gigolo of the female Empress's family. What kind of fan name do you like? Currently typing. Please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 990. Damn it, that Lung Rong is obviously a whore, but she still dared to give me a hard time. A young man cursed indignantly as he walked under the street lamp. She is the most talented disciple of this generation in the Tangled Silk Palace. Coupled with her good looks, the number of practitioners pursuing her can line up from the Tangled Silk Palace to the foot of the mountain. If not for I reckon she would be the next palace master of the Tangled Silk Palace. Another young man winked and laughed. It's hard for us to even see her, let alone get intimate with her. So what? Isn't she still a whore now? That young man wasn't polite at all. Forget it, everyone in the brothel in Wangjing decides who they want to see. Besides, this is Lan City. Even if you don't like it, you don't have to take it to heart. After hearing this, that young man finally calmed down a little. That's right, this was Lan City and not some other place. Even in Wangjing he couldn't do whatever he wanted, let alone here. Just as he suppressed the anger in his heart, he felt his body being dragged to the side by his companion. Make way. Make way. Just as the two of them reached the roadside, two huge figures swept past them. The wind brought by them blew directly on their faces. Although there were no sounds of hooves, every time the two huge figures landed on the ground, there would be a slight tremor. A red saber-toothed tiger and a leopard-like mount with horns on its head, as well as two people on their backs, disappeared into the darkness with loud laughter. If it weren't for his companion who pulled him, he would have been hit by these two big fellows and ended up with broken bones and tendons. However, the rider on their backs didn't even look at the two of them. This made him feel a little depressed. Although he was depressed, he really couldn't afford to offend these two people. After coming to Lan City for a few days, he had asked around. Although he hadn't seen these two people before, he had heard about these two mounts. The red saber-toothed tiger belonged to the public security official, by Shuring's residence, and it was said to have the strength of an advanced earth wheel expert. As for the horned mount, it belonged to the examination official's residence and also had the strength of an intermediate earth wheel expert. Not to mention the two people on its back, he couldn't even afford to offend these two mounts. One had to know that his family only had two guests who were at least at the earth wheel level, and one of them was only at the initial stage of the earth wheel level. Even he had to greet him respectfully when he met him. This kind of mount with the strength of an earth wheel expert wouldn't betray him easily. If he could obtain one, he would be the strongest person in the family. Even the family head wouldn't treat him lightly. Unfortunately, he could only dream about it. Have you heard? These things are called street lamps. They contain thunder and lightning inside, which is why they can emit such light. His companion whispered. The young man was not in a good mood at the moment, so he responded with a grunt. Of course he had heard of it, but he didn't believe it. It's hard to say if it's true or not, but it's really beautiful. His companion sighed again. The young man had to admit that even though Lan City wasn't as prosperous as Wang capital, the size of the city was much smaller. However, Lan City was indeed beautiful at night. The sleepless city truly lived up to its reputation. It was enough to make people sigh in admiration. Hey Qingji, how many tractors do you think we can sell tomorrow? Another person suddenly asked. I don't know. In any case, we have to find a way to buy a few. The young man finally perked up. This was the purpose of his visit. There doesn't seem to be a lot of these things. Previously, those people waited for 3 months and only got 500. This time it's the same as last time. But this time there are a lot of people. Based on what they knew, at least dozens of families and caravans had come. There were probably more that they didn't know. Everyone's target was the tractors. Otherwise, who would come to this barren land to suffer? Even when walking, they had to stick close to the side. As long as we pay enough money, there will definitely be a way, Qingji said. Before coming here, the family had already considered this situation. Anything that could be solved with money wasn't a big deal. This thing was shockingly cheap. As long as one wasn't a fool, they naturally wouldn't think that it was because the aboriginals were stupid. In fact, the old fellows in the family had more or less analyzed the reason. This time, the bottom line given by the family was 5,000 taels of silver per tractor. This was also a more reasonable price for the aboriginals. After all, the materials used were there, and the cost could be estimated as well. Others were selling it for 200 taels, but they were willing to pay 5,000 taels. It wasn't because of their conscience. Conscience was a joke. It wasn't just for the caravans either. More importantly, it was to build a relationship with Zhao Prince Consort. Previously, those clans had shipped a lot of food because they followed Zhao Prince Consort's wishes. This left him with a good impression and things became much smoother. Although they were a step late, as long as they were willing to pay the price, it wasn't impossible for them to catch up. To be able to build such a big family business, none of them were fools. Naturally, they knew the principle that money could only be earned if one could spend it. After all, the world was now in the hands of those barbarians. During Qi Zixiao's wedding, those people actually targeted the chancellors. It wasn't until this sudden order to withdraw that everyone realized who was the most important person. The next day, Qing Ji brought his attendants to the Imperial Geely Tractor 4S shop on Jianghu Street with confidence. Everyone could understand what Geely and tractors meant, but until now no one knew what 4S meant. There was already a group of people waiting outside the Tractor 4S shop. Everyone was standing there obediently. At the side, there was a row of tall winged cavalry warriors who exuded a bloody aura, reminding the latecomers what to do. It was said that Zhao Prince Consort liked order. I also like order, Qing Ji thought to himself. There were already many people in front of him, but he wasn't too late. He obediently entered the queue. Even though he could let his attendants go, he felt that it was safer this way and that there wouldn't be any accidents. After he entered the queue, there were still people joining him. The queue was getting bigger and bigger. Not long after, a few Aboriginal ladies dressed in brightly colored clothes came to the front of the queue and said to the first person in line, "This is my seat." The first person in line was a middle-aged man in his 40s or 50s. He understood the other party's intention, smiled politely and took 2 steps back. "There isn't enough space," that lady said with a cold face. This time the middle-aged man's face turned ugly. The people behind him were also a little unhappy. Even though it wasn't a big deal to give a seat to an Aboriginal, the other party was being too overbearing. "Line up." At this moment, a sudden voice startled everyone. They turned around and saw a lady dressed in winged cavalry attire. She had a scorpion tattoo on her face, and her hair was in countless braids. Even though her figure wasn't considered strong, one could still see her explosive power under her animal skin clothes. "Are you talking about me?" That lady looked surprised. "Hong Xian, right? Yes, I saw you in the city before. Your grandfather is amazing, but this doesn't mean that you can break the rules set by him. Under Her Majesty's orders, we are here to maintain order. No matter who it is, we will follow Her Majesty's rules." After that lady finished speaking, everyone in the queue cheered. They didn't expect that the Aboriginals and the people of the Yun Nation would be treated equally. Today was the first time they felt carefree from the bottom of their hearts since they came to Lan City. Hong Xian stared at that winged cavalry warrior with eyes full of killing intent. Hong Xian was now at the peak of Kismet Heaven and was one step away from entering the Cardinal Heaven realm and becoming a top expert in Dayo. That winged cavalry warrior was only at the intermediate level of Kismet Heaven. However, he wasn't afraid of Hong Xian's identity and killing intent. He revealed a slightly cruel smile and said, "Get ready." Whoosh. The winged cavalry warriors at the side immediately drew their swords. A chill permeated the entire street. Each of the winged cavalry warriors, who were wearing animal skin coats and had various scars and tattoos on their bodies, had a sneer on their faces. They couldn't help but believe that if Hong Xian dared to make the slightest move, they wouldn't have any scruples about the actions of the granddaughter of the 7th most powerful expert in the world. Instead, they would truly treat her as an enemy. Hong Xian's face darkened. She hesitated for a moment and ultimately didn't dare to cause any trouble here. She glared at the other party fiercely and turned around with an ashen face. "Let's go. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile." Chapter 991. "Well, I got it." Ren Baqian nodded his head slightly as he listened to the guard's report on the incident on Jingyang Street. There wasn't the slightest bit of surprise on Ren Baqian's face, because he was the one who arranged the red thread. Previously, the Empress's order in the Yun Nation had strained the relationship between the two parties, and he had been looking for an opportunity to make some changes. The Yun Nation was very important to Dayo. Whether it was geographical location, population, or mineral resources. He didn't want any more trouble to befall the Yun Nation. The more stable that place was, the better it would be until the Yun Nation became a part of Dayo. It just so happened that old fool Hongwu had sent a letter some time ago. The meaning of the letter was clear. The Protectorate of the North had worked hard to defend the border and had made great contributions. The Protectorate of the North needed tractors. Strategically, from tactics, from the lives of the soldiers, the importance of tractors to the Protectorate of the North. But there was only one meaning in the end. The Protectorate of the North had no money. I want a tractor, but I have no money. As for the rest, Your Majesty can arrange it as you see fit. This letter wasn't sent through the Ministry of War. Instead, it was sent directly to the Empress. That old man was simply acting like a hooligan. The Empress knew that Rinpochen was acting like a hooligan. However, after pondering for a while, she decided to allocate a batch of soldiers to him. To be honest, these tractors weren't that important to Rinpochen. He was selling them at a loss. 50 tractors were only worth 10,000 taels of silver. It didn't matter to him whether the Protectorate of the Northeast could afford it or not. But at that time he had an idea. They were putting on a show to ease the relationship between the imperial court and the people of the Yun nation. One shouldn't underestimate this show. After all, the people from the Yun nation were people from various families or chambers of commerce. Although they weren't as powerful as the martial artists in the underworld, they had a lot of influence among the people of the Yun nation. If he could change their views, he could influence many people in the Yun nation through them. This included the scholars of the Yun nation who loved to criticize in private. Hong Xian's identity was very suitable. Firstly, she was Hong Wu's granddaughter and could be said to have a prominent status in Dayo. If she were to act in this scene, her influence and persuasiveness would be greater. Given her status, this wasn't just a warning to the people of the Yun nation, but it was also a warning to the aboriginals. Secondly, she didn't have any official duties and was waiting to break through to the Cardinal Heaven level. Cardinal Heaven and Kismet Heaven were like heaven and earth. Their starting points were completely different. After she broke through to the Cardinal Heaven level, this matter no longer affected her. Thirdly, Hong Xian was a smart person. She had improved a lot over the past few years. The two of them had a conflict in the past, and she was willing to sacrifice a little face in exchange for easing the relationship between the two of them. At the very least, she would be doing him a favor. Also, there was the tractor. Just like that, over and over again, Rinpochen only mentioned it briefly and the other party agreed. Both sides could be said to have hit it off. Although this scene was arranged by Rinpochen, there were still some things that exceeded his expectations. The show was over before the person he arranged was even on stage. According to his plan, Hong Xian would be more aggressive, infuriated, and escalated the matter. Then a captain of the winged cavalry would step in. But as soon as the play started, someone stopped it. "What's the name of that winged cavalry warrior?" Rinpochen asked. "Your Highness, her name is Hua Qinghua. She was recruited by Her Majesty when he went to the 60,000 mountains 3 years ago. She is now a lieutenant." Rinpochen nodded his head. Hua Qinghua was a pretty good name. Even though it messed up his acting, the way he handled things suited his taste. It would be a pity to put such a person in the winged cavalry. Also, the reaction of those winged cavalry warriors at that time was overflowing with murderous intent. They didn't back down in the face of Hong Wu's granddaughter and didn't give her any face. These people were very wild. They should have been recruited from the 60,000 mountains later. And this Hua Qinghua seemed to have a high reputation among these people. He would find an opportunity to transfer these people over to his side. Rinpochen didn't feel the slightest bit of psychological pressure when it came to poaching his wife. The Empress had a big family business and didn't lack this bit of wool. After making the necessary preparations, Rinpochen left the palace with his attendants and went to Jingyang Street. The front of the 4S shop was packed with people. The 4S shop consisted of 5 storefronts connected together and was 20 meters wide. There were 2 glass doors and the rest were all bright floor-to-ceiling glass. It could be said that one could see everything at a glance from the outside. Inside there was a floor, a sofa, a bar counter and a reception room. There was also a brand new tractor in the middle. Under the illumination of the lights, the tractor was shining in the middle. He didn't know what Rinpochen was thinking, but he felt a little uncomfortable every time he saw it. If the tractor in the middle was replaced with a sports car, the incongruity would probably disappear. Rinpochen walked through the crowd with Qingyun's sword at his side to prevent assassination attempts. Although there weren't many people who dared to assassinate Rinpochen nowadays, it was still a precaution. Most of the people in the crowd were seeing Zhao Prince Consort for the first time, and they were secretly sizing him up. Rinpochen didn't care about their gazes and walked straight to the front. Someone set up a chair for him and he turned to sit on it, facing the crowd. "Everyone, there are a total of 500 tractors this time, but there are some changes to the sales method," Rinpochen said faintly. Then, facing everyone's gaze, he continued, This time it will be an auction. The units will be batches of 5, 10, 15, 20, and the highest batch will be 30. After all, you didn't come from afar just to buy a tractor and go for a ride, right? You are right, Your Highness. The crowd didn't know what he meant, but they still answered. Rinpoche was very satisfied. These people from the Yun nation were good at this point, and there wouldn't be an awkward silence. If it were the Aboriginals, it would be hard to say as there wouldn't even be a supporting character. Rinpoche continued, each tractor will be sold at 200 taels of silver, and the highest bidder will win. There were actually 800 tractors this time. 300 of them were reserved for the Aboriginals, and these 500 were all prepared for the people from the Yun nation. These people were all rich and he wasn't prepared to sell them at a loss. It wasn't good to change his mind, so he simply held an auction. As for how much they were willing to pay, that was their business. If they could really bid for each tractor at 200 taels of silver, what would be the point of giving them to them? Of course this was impossible. Following Rinpoche's words, everyone immediately understood. After all, the Yun nation also had auctions. Zhao Prince Consort, are you going to auction here? Everyone immediately understood what was going on. Don't worry everyone. I'm not here today to inform you of these things. Rinpoche smiled. Please inform us, Your Highness. As far as I know, the Yun nation has tickets, right? Rinpoche asked faintly. Everyone looked at each other and wondered why Rinpoche brought this up. Indeed there are. Tickets were the banks on earth. After all, it was really troublesome for these merchants to carry a large amount of gold and silver for transactions. One had to know that large transactions could easily cost 10,000, 100,000, or even hundreds of thousands of taels of silver, which was really inconvenient to transport. The banks on earth had been developed since the Ming dynasty, but the ticket banks in this world were still in their infancy. Many of them were operated by gold banks, and the capital was only a few 100,000 taels of silver. The main business was to deposit money and settle transactions in other places, but there was no interest in depositing money. Of course, the biggest problem was that the scale of these ticket banks was too small. A ticket bank that could cover dozens of cities was already considered large, and it wasn't convenient. Chapter 992. It's not convenient for you to run around with a lot of gold and silver, and it's easy for others to target you. As for the ticketing shops in the Yun nation, I have roughly understood them. There are crooks mixed in with the honest folks and it's very messy. With these tractors and national highways, long-distance transportation will be greatly enhanced in the future, and there will be more cases of large transactions in different places. Therefore, Dayo wants to set up its own bank. It's called a bank. As soon as Rinpoche's voice fell, everyone's heart skipped a beat as they secretly pondered what he meant. Normally, those ticket companies wouldn't dare to play tricks on families like theirs. After all, the scale of the ticket shop wasn't big and it wasn't very strong either. However, if the person in front of them cheated them of their money, they wouldn't be able to reason with him. Could it be that the other party wanted to rip off a layer of skin from them? Rinpoche looked at everyone's expressions, chuckled, and said, "Everyone, don't worry too much. It's not compulsory. I'm just taking this opportunity to say hello to everyone. As for this bank, it will be established in Lan City, Pingdu, Wangjing, Suiyuan, Qingping, and Zhuyan. Although there were only 6 cities, 5 of them covered most of the affluent areas in the Yun nation. As for Lan City, this was usually the final destination for these merchants. For the time being, this was enough. As for the reputation of the royal family, you can rest assured. I don't care about that little bit of silver. In addition, the bank would issue paper coupons of varying amounts. The value of a paper coupon was equivalent to the value of the silver indicated on the paper. This aspect would be explained in detail later. When you deposit gold and silver in the bank, you will get paper certificates of equal value, ranging from 1 to 1,000 taels of silver, which will be enough for you to deal with any kind of situation. We don't charge you for depositing gold and silver in the bank. Only the delivery of goods in other places would be charged. The amount of your deposit determines the level of your customer. The higher the level of a customer, the lower the fee for the delivery. Rinpoche maintained a faint smile throughout. Nowadays, bank deposits pay interest. However, the people in this world had never heard of such a good thing. If he gave them interest, they would probably think that he was plotting something. After all, these families and merchants didn't believe in free lunches. Waiving the fees for their deposits was already a great benefit. Following Rinpoche's words, everyone had their own thoughts, but no one dared to speak under such circumstances. He was just thinking about his own thoughts. Their dealings with others were all through the path of business. However, the Aboriginals would never take the business path. They would always take the knife path. Therefore, even though Rinpoche had set up such a ticketing shop, they couldn't help but feel uneasy. Everyone, you can't possibly suspect that the royal family covets you for something, right? We wouldn't dare. If you don't dare, then it means that you have doubts. Rinpoche teased. How could that be? We can still trust the royal family's reputation. That would be great. No matter what you think, the reputation of the royal family is much stronger than those small banks. Moreover, do I covet your money? It's just that it's more convenient for large transactions to circulate. What I see is the whole country. I hope that the emergence of the bank can bring changes to the business model in the future. Rinpoche laughed. After trying out the convenience of the bank, Rinpoche believed that they wouldn't reject it. Even if someone really felt that it was convenient to transport a large amount of gold and silver to trade, Rinpoche would make them feel that it was inconvenient. How could there be no bandits in this day and age? The introduction of a bank, which was actually a money house, was just the first step. Next, the salaries of the various ministries and officials would be distributed through the bank. Next, the salaries of the craftsmen and workers would be distributed. According to the original agreement, it was time to distribute some salaries to the prisoners of war so that they could get used to this kind of work. It was much easier to carry out a task from top to bottom than for others to do it. Using paper money as the standard was naturally a matter of both advantages and disadvantages. There was no need to talk about the advantages. Nowadays, a large amount of copper was used as currency in the market, which made Rinpoche's heart ache. As for the disadvantages, one would know just by looking at the countries with serious inflation. However, Rinpoche already had plans to introduce a gold and silver standard. Linking the currency to gold and silver would prevent big trouble in the future. Based on the current social development of this world, it was more suitable to use gold and silver as the standard. There wouldn't be a problem for at least a few decades. Moreover, when Rinpoche came to this world, he was curious. The currency used on Earth was precious metal, and it was actually the same in this world. In particular, when he found out that the humans were exiled from the other side of the 60,000 mountains, Rinpoche was even more puzzled about how gold and silver were used as currency. It wasn't until a recent discovery in the laboratory in the mountains that he made some conjectures. There was another substance among the gold and silver in this world that was difficult to separate. It was named the singularity, which meant the beginning. This substance, called the singularity, had a very unique characteristic. It could absorb the energy released during the transformation of substances, including potential energy, chemical energy, and electrical energy. The discovery of this strange substance excited everyone in the laboratory, especially the experts in physics, chemistry, and materials science. Each of them immediately became mad scientists and didn't care about anything other than the laboratory every day. This was a huge discovery when they came to this world. It was said that according to the people in the laboratory, they often heard them muttering something like, "Nobar River." Rinpoche couldn't help laughing when he heard this. This group of people seemed to have forgotten something important. However, it was good that they could do their jobs well. Although he hadn't conducted any more experiments after learning about the existence of this substance, Rinpoche guessed that the use of gold and silver as currency was probably the currency system that humans had on the other side of the 60,000 mountains. If that was the case, this substance would probably be very useful. Huge. Alright everyone. That's all. I've said what I wanted to say. As for the time of the auction, it will be tonight at the small arena in the east of the city. Please be prepared. Rinpoche got up and prepared to leave after finishing what he needed to say. Your Highness. Rinpoche turned his head and saw a man in his 30s. If he remembered correctly, his name was Chin. It was very similar to the name of his good friend. However, what really caught Rinpoche's attention was that after he revealed some ideas, the Chin family was the first to transport a large amount of food to and from the two places, setting an example for the other families. Rinpoche had always liked people who were so sensible and tactful. Do you still have any questions? When will this bank start, Your Highness? Our Chin family trusts Your Highness. 3 days later. Rinpoche gave him a smile. How could anyone not like such a sensible person? First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 993. The last batch of 30 tractors will be sold at 200 taels each for a total of 6,000 taels. Everyone is aware of the rules. This is the last batch of tractors for tonight and also the last chance to bid. Those who are still empty-handed, don't miss it. Following the announcement from the stage, Everyone perked up. The auction was held in the arena. Other than the large area, everything else was very simple and crude. However, no one cared about such things at this time. In the previous 20 auctions, 470 tractors had been sold. Some people achieved their wishes while others were surprised. However, the price far exceeded the starting price of 200 taels each from the first auction. 5 tractors were sold for a total of 14,000 taels, which was 14 times the starting price. This exceeded many people's expectations and set the tone for tonight's auction. Although everyone knew that the price wouldn't be as low as 200 taels each, the starting price of 2,800 taels each was still beyond many people's expectations. The last batch of 30 tractors even caused some big families and chambers of commerce to compete for them. They were flaunting their wealth, but not to the families who knew them well, but to Zhao Prince Consort, who was sitting in the VIP room at the top. 67,000 taels. 83,000 taels. 110,000 taels. Is there anyone who wants to raise the price? The person standing on the stage was a member of the Jing tribe. At this moment he scanned the people sitting in the audience with a smile. He knew that 110,000 wasn't the starting price. The previous round had already reached 160,000 taels, and the price for this round should be even higher. Sure enough, as soon as he finished speaking, someone raised his paddle again. When the dust had settled, this batch of tractors was sold for 175,000 taels of silver. This time, the average price of the 500 tractors was close to 4,500 taels. The total price was more than 2 million taels, which was equivalent to 30% of Dayo's annual income. Even the people who waved their gold to bid for these tractors couldn't help but envy his ability to amass wealth. This also made many people feel that Renbaqian's money house wasn't used to cheat people out of money. With such an ability to amass wealth, there was no need for him to do such things at the expense of his reputation. Especially when the other party was the royal family. Qing Ji heaved a long sigh of relief. Fortunately, he had acted early this time. Although he didn't bid for the 30 tractors that were targeted, he managed to bid for a batch of 20 tractors. If he really waited until the end, the family's bottom line wouldn't be able to take down any batch of 30 tractors. No matter what, he could report back to his superiors this time. These 20 tractors were an admission ticket. Just when the crowd was calculating their gains tonight or regretting not making their move earlier, the auctioneer on the stage spoke again. Everyone, the 30 tractors just now were the last batch of tractors, not the finale of tonight's show. What comes next is the highlight of the night. As soon as he finished speaking, many people's eyes lit up. There's actually an important show tonight? He didn't know what it was. One had to know that those tractors had already been sold for more than 2 million taels of silver. The auctioneer kept everyone in suspense. Soon, the final highlight will appear in front of everyone. A group of women from the Jing tribe came to them with plates in their hands. The plate was made of wood and covered with a red cloth. It was hard to tell what was inside, but it seemed to be something very thin. When the red cloth was removed, the answer was revealed. There were only 2 pages of paper on the plate. Or rather, it was a map and a painting. Everyone picked up the drawing and painting and their eyes narrowed. The drawing was a map of the Yun nation. The entire Yun nation was divided into 10 parts and covered with different colors. Among them, the central and eastern parts of the Yun nation had the smallest area covered by each color, but they were the richest areas in the Yun nation. What did this map mean? The painting was of a house and there didn't seem to be anything special about it. The only thing that caught people's attention were the walls and windows of the house. One of the walls was completely made of glass, and sunlight shone directly into the house. There was a strange-looking chair with a semicircle at the bottom, and an old man was lying on it, reading a book. There was a teapot on the coffee table beside him, and outside the room, a child was squatting there with a palm leaf fan to boil water. Just by looking at the painting, one could feel the leisurely and carefree aura of the old man. Another thing that caught people's attention about this painting was that it was too realistic. It was completely different from the paintings on the market, as if a real scene had been cut out and put into the painting. What did this painting and this picture represent? After a moment, someone's eyes lit up. This painting wouldn't be meaningless. The only thing that caught people's attention in this painting was the glass-like wall. Was it related to this? Was it the finale? Everyone gradually had their own guesses. If it was really as they thought, it could indeed be considered the finale. However, what was the meaning of that map of the Yun nation? The auctioneer standing on the stage smiled and said, "I'm sure everyone has seen the items that you have won. Everyone must be guessing what the finale of tonight's show will be. Now, it's my turn to solve the mystery for everyone. Tonight's grand finale is the agency rights for these crystal-like, large-scale glass products that can bring light to everyone. The reason why it's called large-scale glass products is that this includes the rights to sell glass windows, glass doors, glass walls, glass roofs, and even glass houses and glass boats. Glass is a great discovery made by Zhao Prince Consort. Since the invention of glass, it has replaced the original paper windows and doors. Following the auctioneer's incessant bragging, everyone's faces were filled with surprise. Those who had been to Lan City naturally knew about glass. There was no need to say more about its benefits, and the market for this thing was naturally extremely huge. However, only Zhao Prince Consort and Dayo's glass factories knew how to make such crystal-like things. Although some people were tempted, no one dared to have any ideas about it. They didn't expect that this auction would actually involve glass. The question now was, what exactly did the rights to sell mean? Everyone could understand it from the literal meaning, but they wanted to hear the other party's explanation. One had to know that the actual meaning of one word could make a huge difference. Moreover, everyone was only guessing at the moment. In order to let everyone feel the changes and interest that glass brings to life and to let glass enter thousands of households, Zhao Prince Consort has decided to auction the rights to sell large-scale glass products to all of you. As for the agent, that is, the right to sell the products in this region. As long as you have this agency, you will be able to continuously customize the glass products you need and sell them. As you can see from the map, the entire Yun nation is divided into 10 regions, which means that there are a total of 10 rights to sell. In this region, all of you are the only agents. Only all of you can sell and customize these large-scale glass products in this region. No one else will intervene. Everyone, I don't think I need to tell you how much profit this is going to bring, right? This is the only industry with countless prospects, and it's the only one in this region, right? In order to ensure an adequate supply, Zhao Prince Consort will build a glass factory near Pingdu City to supply sufficient goods to all of you. Everyone was ecstatic. Before they came, they absolutely didn't expect such a good thing to happen. Just as the auctioneer said, if one monopolized the entire market in a region, everyone would fight over the prospects and profits. There was definitely no shortage of sales for things like glass. Even if it was just ordinary glass windows, as long as there was enough of it, it would be enough to multiply their net worth several times. As for the quantity, there was no need to consider it at all. How many wealthy households were there in the Yun nation? How big of a market was there? So far, this market was still unoccupied. The only thing that puzzled everyone was that their target this time was the tractor, and all the gold and silver they brought had been used up in the auction just now. Then the auctioneer's next sentence greatly dispelled this doubt. Zhao Prince Consort has taken into account that the rights to sell for a large sum, so he doesn't require you to pay up after the auction. As long as you send the money to Lan City or the banks in Pingdu or Wangjing within a month, you will be able to pay up for this auction. Chapter 994. The competition for the regional distribution rights for the 10 glass products was much more intense than the previous tractors. Even if the tractors weren't bought this time, they could still be bought in a few months to 6 months later. As for the dealership, there wouldn't be another chance if he missed this opportunity. Of course, there was a time limit for this distribution rights, 3 years. However, as long as there was enough production, the market would be saturated in 3 years. For ordinary people, filling their stomachs, getting married, and having children were the most important things. The difference between glass and paper windows wasn't within their consideration. The target group for this product was the rich families of the Yun nation. 3 years was enough to change the appearance of all the windows in their homes. After 3 years, although there would still be a demand, it would be a steady stream. There was no one present who did not understand this principle. As a result, this auction gave Rinpochen a satisfactory answer. 13 million taels of silver. This was the price of the distribution rights alone. In the following years, they would bring him a steady stream of income. Rinpochen left the arena with satisfaction. Although he didn't need to be present for this, he was still very interested in the first investment fair that he organized. That's right. In his opinion, this was actually an investment fair. It was easy to transport small-shaped products like glass cups to the Yun nation for sale. But if he wanted to sell glass windows, it would be more troublesome. He might as well sell the distribution rights and let the people of the Yun nation do this. He could easily reap huge profits. After 3 years, the formula for the glass could also be thrown out. There was no need to keep such things that didn't require much technology in his hands. Not only glass, but many technologies would also be thrown out after he made the biggest profits. Changing the world required the efforts of the people of the world, not a single person who had to do everything himself. After returning to the palace, Rinpoche heard a yell before he entered the bedroom. Woo, 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 it was Erhua's voice. Outside the hall, Zhu Hua, who was wearing silk clothes, was leaning against the wall and dozing off. However, her sleeves and skirt were rolled up. She preferred to wear short skirts and sleeveless clothes, and the outfit she was wearing now made her feel too restrained. Hearing Rinpoche's footsteps, Zhu Hua's eyes were hazy. When she saw Rinpoche's face, she suddenly shivered. Greetings, Principal. Rinpoche was still a deterrent to Zhu Hua. It probably stemmed from her experience of washing toilets for 2 of her 4 years of schooling. A black shadow was swinging back and forth in the air of the hall. There were a few ropes hanging in the hall, and Erhua was holding onto the ropes, mimicking Tarzan. Upon seeing Rinpoche enter, Erhua cheered, let go of the rope and pounced on him. Splat. She lay face down 2 meters in front of Rinpoche. Rinpoche felt the pain just by looking at it. Honeysuckle raised his head. There were no traces on his face, but his small face was full of grievance, and his eyes were full of tears. Rinpoche didn't go forward to hug his daughter. Instead, he covered his ears with both hands and retreated out of the hall at lightning speed. Wow! A cry that was loud enough to tear the roof off spread throughout the entire palace. After a while, 2 flowers finally calmed down. Rinpoche poked his head into the hall and saw Lu Hua sitting on the floor, sobbing and wiping his tears. The Empress was sitting on the sofa with a calm look on her face, eating fruits from time to time. Your Majesty, is this your biological daughter? Rinpoche asked. Yes, but I didn't see you catch her, the Empress said with a faint smile. Rinpoche spread his hands, picked up his precious Erhua, and carefully prevented her from punching his chest with her little fists. I was thinking about something just now and was a little distracted. Rinpoche expressed his innocence. The Empress glanced at him from the corner of her eyes. This excuse wasn't sincere at all. Boo-hoo. Erhua's face twitched and the corners of her eyes drooped. She looked like she was about to cry again. Hey Erhua, you're already a big girl. It's time for you to learn to face reality and setbacks, Rinpoche said sincerely, and his face was full of love. I have never seen a father like you, the Empress said sarcastically. Which father have you seen? Rinpoche asked. The Empress immediately fell into deep thought. At least she had seen her own father before. Even though she couldn't see him most of the time, he was always busy, always very dignified and very fierce. However, he was still good to her. She remembered that she once broke a bottle of his precious medicine and got beaten up. Do you know, my heart hurts when I beat you up. But after I beat you up, my heart feels much better. After thinking about it, the Empress was slightly depressed. Forget it, let's not talk about this anymore. The Empress shook her head and chased away the depression in her heart. She was afraid that if she continued thinking about it, the good impression that the late Emperor had left in her heart would disappear. How's the auction going? Your Majesty, guess how much silver did we win this time? Rinpoche immediately laughed. This was a number that could surprise the Empress. One had to know that the income of the imperial family was only about 100,000 taels of silver a year. To describe the imperial family of Dayo as unlucky was a little insulting. To be honest, those chiefs were much wealthier than the imperial family of Dayo. Rinpoche laughed as he put honeysuckle on his neck. Then he felt 2 small hands wrapping around his head and twisting it to one side. He was scared out of his wits and shouted, Honeysuckle, let go of me. If she were to twist him off. Rinpoche didn't know if the ointment in this world could save a person whose head was twisted 360 degrees. Rinpoche pulled the little fellow down from his neck and slapped her butt. Did I say that? You're not allowed to hit my chest with your little fists or twist my head. You're not allowed to hit my stomach with your head and act like a spoiled child. Oh. The little fellow was shocked by Rinpoche's stern words and expression, and her eyes were full of tears. You scared her. The Empress said faintly. She scared me just now. Rinpoche was still a little shaken. You have been slacking ever since you returned from the 60,000 mountains. In the Empress's heart, Rinpoche's cultivation had always been a big problem. However, to Rinpoche, cultivation was for the sake of marrying the Empress. Now that he had married the Empress, the importance of cultivation was greatly reduced. As for personally stabbing people with a gun, Rinpoche was quite excited for a period of time after experiencing the thrill of being unparalleled. However, it didn't take long for him to put this matter aside. Of course, there was another important result of cultivation, which was to prolong one's lifespan. However, Rinpoche felt that it wouldn't be a problem for him to attain the spirit wheel level. To others, the Tongtian Gate was a hurdle that would allow them to become a dragon overnight if they succeeded and fall into the abyss if they failed. However, for Rinpoche it could be smoothly passed. As long as he cultivated slowly, he would attain the spirit wheel level one day. Then, he would just have to wait for the medicine on earth to reverse aging and prolong life. After much difficulty, Rinpoche managed to coax Honeysuckle and threw her to Zhu Hua to rest before the two of them continued their previous conversation. How much? The Empress's voice was slightly higher. The tractor and the dealership for glass products, 15 million taels of silver. Rinpoche stretched out his 5 fingers and waved them in the air. That's equivalent to 2 years of the previous imperial court's income. The Empress sighed. Seeing how Rinpoche easily obtained 2 years' worth of income from Dayo's imperial court, the Empress began to feel a little unbalanced. Just the glass products alone will bring back more than 10 million taels of profit in the next 3 years. Rinpoche stretched out 2 more fingers and sighed. Now we have the money to build the new palace. The Empress suddenly lifted her leg and kicked Rinpoche off the sofa. What are you doing? Rinpoche fell to the ground in a daze. It's nothing. I feel much better now. After the Empress finished speaking, she thought about it and laughed again. Then she burst out laughing. Chapter 995. He had just looked for an editor to edit it. He had thought that he had written more than 1,000 chapters, but it turned out that there were only 972 chapters. The messed-up chapter names of The Pretty Boy of the Empress's Family had been changed. Please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 996. I heard that you robbed more than 10 million taels of silver last night? Tong Jingye mysteriously whispered into Rinpoche's ear. Tong Jingye wasn't the only one who was shocked by this news. The others were the same. After court was dismissed, Tong Jingye saw Rinpoche returning to the palace from the academy and immediately pulled him aside. The others also slowed down a little and pricked up their ears. It's for sale. Remember, it's for sale. Rinpoche corrected him. Will they be the ones selling the glass in the future? Tong Jingye asked as he smacked his lips. Yes, I sold the dealership. Rinpoche nodded. There was nothing to hide about this. They are willing to pay such a high price for it, which means that they can earn more money, right? Tong Jingye asked again. Indeed. Rinpoche continued to nod. Tong Jingye then understood and said disdainfully, I've always heard people talk about squandering, but I've seen it for myself today. Rinpoche almost spat blood on his face. Tong Jingye was humbly asking for advice just now, but he turned hostile so quickly? Am I smarter or are you smarter? Rinpoche asked with his eyes wide open. Tong Jingye put his hands on his hips and laughed. Don't you have any idea how smart you are to ask such a question? Rinpoche was so angry that he spat at Tong Jingye's face. Tong Jingye swayed his head and dodged it perfectly. He clicked his tongue and said, You are angry out of humiliation. Rinpoche felt that if he had a beard, it would be standing up by now. Tong Jingye, this old man really made people want to vomit blood. Even so, the fact that Rinpoche had amassed 15 million taels of silver this time still shocked the officials. If it wasn't for the fact that Rinpoche sold a chicken that could lay golden eggs, many of them would have asked him how to earn money. Shi Qing sat in the courtyard and laughed. Does he lack a chicken that can lay golden eggs? As for Tong Jingye, he was all smiles when he returned to his residence. Grandpa, I heard that you went to provoke Yagüe? Tong Lan asked with a smile during dinner. Tong Lan was now 14 years old, and her figure had become slender and elegant. People couldn't help but lament that this girl had grown up. Grandpa is speaking the truth. Tong Jingye stroked his long beard and laughed. Do you really think he sold it wrongly? Tong Lan continued asking. Tong Jingye rubbed her head. Does he look like a fool to you? Yes. Tong Lan nodded and said, If others treat him as a fool, then they are the real fools. That's right. Then what are you going to do? My classmate almost died of laughter when he heard about it. Then he told me about it. Tong Lan pouted unhappily. Otherwise, I'm afraid he'll be in some trouble during this period. Who still dares to find trouble with him? It was good enough that he didn't cause trouble for others. His Majesty is biased, always biased towards him. Sigh, Your Majesty, you've changed. Tong Jingye looked unhappy at the mention of this matter. Why was he always the one getting beaten up every time he went to the brothel with Zhao Prince Consort? His Majesty wasn't like this before. Wasn't this a little too open and aboveboard? Tang Xinye then said, no one dares to cause trouble for him, but there are still many people who want to ask him for advice on how to make money. This doesn't matter, but the Ministry of Works is still waiting for his so-called mother machine. It's not appropriate for him to be bothered by people all the time. He doesn't know that you are being kind. Tong Lan curled her lips and felt that Tang Xinye was doing a thankless job. As for the importance of the mother machine, she knew it. Yagüe often said that the mother machine was an industrial mother machine. With the mother machine, more sophisticated equipment could be manufactured, and with more sophisticated equipment, more sophisticated instruments and parts could be manufactured. In fact, Tong Lan's batch of students learned the most and had the best combination of learning and practice. The rest of the students played with what they had left. As a result, Renbaqian was most satisfied with the outlook and way of thinking of Tong Lan and the other students. You just said that anyone who thinks he's a fool is really a fool. Tang Xinye laughed heartily. If he knew that Renbaqian had scolded him after returning to the palace, he definitely wouldn't have laughed so happily. If it were someone else, Renbaqian might have thought about the reasons behind it. But Tang Xinye. In any case, after the auction ended, Renbaqian took this opportunity to earn a large sum of money that could be used to invest in the construction of the new palace. Many chambers of commerce and families in the Yun nation also took this opportunity to get acquainted with Renbaqian and get a hen that could lay golden eggs for 3 years. It could be said that both parties were happy. The scene that happened in front of the Tractor 4S shop that day also became a topic of discussion among a small number of people. Subsequently, it spread to the ears of many rich families and scholars. From this incident, it could be seen that the upper echelons of the aboriginals were indeed different from before, and the core of this change was Zhao Prince Consort. Merchants preferred a peaceful and prosperous world, not a world of blood and fire. In troubled times, human lives were as cheap as dogs. No matter how rich they were, they couldn't guarantee the safety of their families. From the current point of view, the situation was still developing in a stable direction. If this continued, even if the Yun nation changed owners, they might still be able to continue living a wealthy life. In addition, another point was that after 2 trips on the official road from Lan City to the Yun nation, the official road paved with marble slabs wasn't pleasing to the eye. The width of the former was 4 times that of the latter. When one lifted the curtain and looked out, one could see everything at a glance. It was extremely spacious, and it was hard to believe that it was built by 100,000 people in 3 years. The smoothness of the cement road and the stone road couldn't be compared at all. This feeling was even more obvious when one was sitting in a carriage. It was said that the Aboriginals' carriages used a material called rubber, which was much more stable than their carriages. Unfortunately, it couldn't be bought at the moment. It was said that the road from Lan City to the Qin nation was being built, and it was unknown whether the road to the Yun nation would be built in the future. Renbaqian was sitting in the rearguard commandery with Hua in his arms. Remember, let the strong men assist the soldiers and maintain order. There are so many people here and we can't let anything go wrong. If there are any problems, report them immediately, Renbaqian instructed the people below. Understood. Renbaqian nodded and dismissed the people. He knocked on the table and said, Lieutenant Hua Qinghua, let her in. A moment later, a woman in a leather coat with a long saber at her waist, braided hair, and a scorpion tattoo on her face strode in. She looked around as she walked and asked, Zhao Prince Consort, why did you call me here? Renbaqian sized her up. Previously he was far away and there were more people around, so he couldn't see her clearly. It had to be said that the corners of her eyes and eyebrows were fierce, and it was somewhat less attractive on a woman's face. However, this didn't matter to her. He liked her way of doing things. Are you interested in changing positions? Renbaqian asked with a smile on his face. What do you mean? Hua Qinghua widened her eyes and asked without any hesitation. Well, I think you do a good job. It's a pity to leave you in the winged cavalry. I'm not looking down on the winged cavalry, but I'm afraid that there will be fewer battles in the future. If a person like you is placed in another position, he or she will be able to play a greater role and better contribute to the construction of Dayo's society. Hua Qinghua scratched her head and looked puzzled. Zhao Prince Consort, are you going to change my position? Simply put, that's it. Renbaqian nodded. Is there anyone who wants to fight? Is there a fight? Isn't it exciting? Hua Qinghua's eyes lit up. I've been bored out of my mind recently. Maybe there is. Renbaqian set a distant goal for her. Fight with Zidonglai. Isn't it exciting? I can't beat him. Hua Qinghua said frankly. Renbaqian laughed. What a straightforward character. Zidonglai was the protector general of the northeast and the Yun nation's god of death. Hua Qinghua didn't even mention whether she dared to or not and just said that she couldn't beat him. Hua Qinghua, who was in his arms, looked around. Seeing that Rinpochen wasn't paying attention to her, she sneakily picked up an ink stone from the table and put it in her mouth. Gotcha. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 997. Rinpochen sent Hua Qinghua off and stared at Hua, who was sitting on the table with a cheerful look on her face. He was pondering over a very important question with a serious look on his face. Should he send her to the clinic? Woo. Hua stretched out her chubby little hands toward Rinpochen for a hug. Don't move. What did you do just now? Rinpochen asked sternly. Looking at Rinpochen's serious expression, Hua pouted and said, Woo? Oh. A cry that resounded through half of Lan City engulfed Rinpochen. After a long time, the dizzy Rinpochen carried Hua out of the rearguard commandery. At this time, there were only a few people left in the rearguard commandery who could still breathe. Those who could run had all run. Those who couldn't run had to rely on their bodies. Hua's face had been washed clean, and there was no blackness in her mouth. Rinpochen felt that with Hua's strong physique, she didn't need to go to the clinic. She even ate a third of a solar cell the last time. On the way back to the palace, Hua looked at the shops and pedestrians on the left and right. She kept stretching out her hands and laughing. Unfortunately, Rinpochen didn't dare to let her go. What if she bit someone? There was still a bite mark on Hua's chest. Don't ask Rinpochen how he knew. Hua was about to go crazy. Hua was almost 20 years old and was considered a big girl. In addition, she had always been like a wild girl who liked to compete and be brave. Her body was getting hotter and hotter. In the middle of the night, she ran to Rinpochen and vowed, I quit. Even if you fire me, I won't do it. However, when Rinpochen increased her monthly salary from 100 taels to 200 taels, plus 4 days of rest every month and 3 bottles of the most important beef mince, Hua felt that she could continue working. After returning to the palace, Rinpochen threw Hua to Hua and told her to take care of her before going to look for the Empress. That night, Hua ran in a panic and said, Oh no, the little princess has been poisoned. Rinpochen and the Empress were shocked. In a flash, the Empress disappeared without a trace. Rinpochen frowned and asked, What happened? I don't know. Hua, who had always been wild, was also a little flustered. When the little princess went to the toilet just now, the filth she expelled was all black. Rinpochen's angry face suddenly froze. It was black. Black. Nonsense, he ate half of an inkstone during the day, how could it not be black? At this point in time, the Empress had already flipped out. After all, her biological daughter was poisoned in the palace, so it was natural for her to react violently. At this moment, Rinpochen could already feel the aura coming from the palace beside him. It was as if a huge mountain was pressing down on the entire palace. Everyone in the palace looked in the direction of the aura in shock. The palace guards rushed to the scene. When Rinpochen arrived, half the courtyard was already filled with people. The Empress stood in the middle of the hall and looked at the bucket in front of her. Her face was gloomy as if a thunderbolt was about to strike. Someone, go and inform the doctor to come over immediately. Others, tell me, why did my daughter encounter such a thing in this palace? Rinpochen had just rushed out of the hall when he heard this voice. Immediately he became anxious. This time he had made a huge blunder. He hurriedly shouted in a deep voice, That's right. Why would the princess eat an inkstone in the palace? Which idiot put the inkstone in a place where the princess can reach it? The Water Empress, who was about to strike down with lightning, was stunned when she heard this voice. Her expression immediately turned strange. The aura on her body also began to dissipate. Everyone in the courtyard was at a loss. They couldn't help but look at their surroundings. What exactly happened? Everyone was still in a daze. Aren't you going to investigate? Do you have to wait for Her Majesty to get angry? Rinpochen looked at everyone standing there like wooden blocks and scolded them in exasperation. Yes. Everyone dispersed with a blank look on their faces. What was an inkstone? And where exactly did the little princess eat it? What exactly was going on? Was there anyone who could explain? The guards in the palace were considered high-level intellectuals if they could read large characters. How could they possibly know something as high-end as an inkstone? Rinpochen hurried back to the hall. The Empress had a strange look on her face. She was a little playful, a little angry and a little glad. Tell me what happened. The Empress's face turned gloomy when she saw Rinpoche. It seemed like he knew what was going on, but he didn't tell her? Almost caused a storm? Congratulations, Your Majesty. Not only did Hua display the greatest talent in martial arts in 10,000 years, but he also showed a strong interest in knowledge. Rinpoche laughed. Stare. The Empress looked straight into his eyes and waited for him to say something. If you want to be a scholar, you have to have some knowledge. Rinpoche laughed dryly. Then she ate half of the ink stone. Rinpoche spread his hands. The Empress was confused. Rinpoche was speechless. Zhu Hua, who hurried over, shrank her neck. She suddenly felt a little cold, and the atmosphere in the hall was a little strange. After a while, the Empress left in a hurry. Zhao Prince Consort used some strength to pull himself up from the ground. Then he pulled Hua off the wall. Wah! Another cry that awakened the entire palace and half of Lan City was heard. Although there were no trivial matters in the royal family, what happened in Dayo's harem was indeed a trivial matter. There were only two things that were most important to Rinpoche. One was to recruit 50,000 laborers from Tianjin Basin to build the new city. The daily necessities of these people weren't trivial matters, especially when it came to transporting them from Tianjin Basin to the new city. It was a journey of thousands of kilometers and tens of thousands of people. This was a test of the ability of Dayo's officials. The other matter was the mother machine that the sword masters were making. It had to be said that these sword masters were indeed talented in this aspect. If they didn't have swords in their hands, they would be seen grabbing hair, pulling collars, spitting and punching each other. When they held swords in their hands, they immediately became peerless sword immortals. A strand of hair in their hands could be cut into 16 pieces. After spending 2 years learning all kinds of knowledge with their ability to absorb, they could at least reach the level of a master's degree. Coupled with their superb hands-on ability and exquisite control, they had become professional talents with superb hands-on ability that amazed even the experts. In particular, those flying swords that came at the command of the experts were so shocked that their jaws almost dropped. No matter how many times they saw it, they couldn't reduce the shock in their hearts. They felt that Darwin's and Newton's coffins couldn't hold on any longer. The existence of flying swords simply challenged their outlook on life, values and worldview. Of course, they should have abandoned these things after coming to this world. It just so happened that the equipment in the laboratory was still relatively scarce, so someone proposed the concept of a mother machine in an attempt to make more sophisticated equipment. These sword masters also understood the importance of a mother machine from the knowledge that they had learned. The rest of the matter took its natural course. With a few spirit wheel sword masters as the main force and many earth wheel sword masters as assistants, it took them half a month to create the first milling machine with a processing accuracy of 0.1 millimeters. When Rinpoche found out about this, they were already thinking about how to make a milling machine with an accuracy of 0.06 millimeters. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 998. Genius 1 second to remember website address. Chinese Apex. Latest update. No advertisements. He had just returned from the hospital. Just now, he was still complaining to his wife that he had been through a lot of hardships recently. First, he had gotten injured while traveling. Then, due to bandaging and drinking, his minor injuries had turned into serious injuries. He had only recovered after a month of recuperation. Now there were 2 bumps under the skin of his thighs. Then his son had gotten the flu again. From the 30th until today, he had spent more than half of his time in the hospital. His son had just recovered and his wife was lying down again. Pneumonia, fever 39 degrees Celsius. After waiting for a few hours, he sent his wife to the hospital again. Fortunately, there were much fewer patients in the emergency department than in the pediatrics department. If it was the pediatrics department, he reckoned that he would only be able to leave the hospital the next morning. Also, his mother-in-law had just completed the procedures today and would be undergoing surgery the next day. He did not know if his wife would recover the next day. In any case, there was not a single day of peace at the end of the year and the beginning of the year. He felt that there were all sorts of things happening. It was not to act pitiful, nor was it to apply for leave. In any case, he would write as much as he could and throw caution to the wind. He just wanted to complain. He had just bought a VR helmet at the end of last month. Could he have time to watch a short movie? The terrible ending of the 18th year and the beginning of the 19th year of The Toy Boy of the Empress's Family. Currently typing. Please wait for a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page again to get the latest update. Apex Chinese full text update. Remember website. Chapter 999. Ren Baqin pushed aside some matters and took 2 days to go to the laboratory. He also brought along the little princess Erhua. Normally, parents in the city would want to take their children to the suburbs. Although the palace wasn't small, it was still too small for this world. Ren Baqin also hoped that she could see more things. Just like ordinary parents, they had a lot in common when it came to treating their children. Erhua wasn't as excited and eager as she was when she first left the palace. Although the boundless plains and fields made people feel free, in the eyes of this little fellow, there was nothing new and interesting. Occasionally, when Ren Baqin wasn't paying attention, she would grab some strange things and stuff them into her mouth. For example, bugs on grass stalks, for example, a three-eyed toad, for example, a butterfly the size of a palm that was flying, for example, a bug that looked like a beetle on a tree, his chubby little palm pressed up and grabbed, and with a flip of his hand he threw it directly into his mouth. Her eyes narrowed. Ren Baqin could feel the happiness in her expression. This happiness lasted until they entered the mountain. This mountain was originally called Mount Neitu, and the meaning of the name was obvious. It was very simple and straightforward. Ren Baqin waved his hand and changed it to Mount Zhongshi, which was actually Mount End. After all, everything in this world would start from here. From the name, one could see Ren Baqin's expectations for the laboratory here. The laboratory was halfway up the mountain, and there were soldiers guarding the foot of the mountain. A cement road went straight to the mountainside, and at the top, the winged cavalry were the guards. Besides the lack of Cardinal Heaven experts, the security here was second only to that of the palace. Coupled with a few spirit wheel sword masters in the laboratory, the security here wasn't much weaker than that of the palace except for the Empress. When Ren Baqin arrived at the mountainside and got off his mount, Erhua cried out and jumped into the forest the moment he turned around. "Find her and bring her back," Ren Baqin ordered the guards around him. Now that the murderers on the mountain had almost been eliminated, it was rare to even see a man-will expert. With Erhua's skills, she naturally wouldn't be in any danger. However, as soon as he entered the laboratory, he heard a cry from afar. Ren Baqin scuttled out of the courtyard. In less than a minute, he saw Zhu Hua returning with Erhua in her arms. Erhua's eyes were filled with tears. He was crying with snot and tears, and he kept spitting out saliva. "This is..." She ate the stinky turtle. Zhu Hua had a gloating look on his face. Who told her to bite his chest? Who wasn't a young girl? Ren Baqin. Stinky turtle was a type of insect the size of 2 finger joints. When it encountered an enemy, it would release a strong irritating liquid. This kind of fighting method was very common, and there were many such species on Earth, such as the 9-fragrance bug, the stink bug. However, the bugs in this world were especially smelly, and the smell was especially disgusting. Of course, it was nothing compared to a skunk bomb. Even so, Two Flower had suffered quite a bit this time. Ren Baqin felt that this was an opportunity to get rid of her habit of eating random things. He smiled and carried Honeysuckle over. A second later, he stuffed Honeysuckle back into Zhu Hua's arms. It was too smelly. After suffering such a big loss, Erhua finally behaved for a while. She curled up in Zhu Hua's arms and sobbed. The lingering smell wouldn't disappear for a while, and it was enough for her to remember. When Ren Baqin arrived at the laboratory, he first looked at the simple milling machine. The gears, lead screw and knife holder were all exposed. It was powered by hand, but it could be easily changed to electricity. There was also a row of various milling cutters at the side. This milling machine was mainly used to process screws, twist drills and other parts with grooves. Although it was simple, it had an extraordinary significance. 0.3 millimeters. This was a level of precision that could only be achieved by an old craftsman who had been immersed in forging for decades. However, at this moment only this machine was needed. Any apprentice could operate it, and the speed was several times faster than those old craftsmen. With this machine, it meant that the manufacturing of precision equipment in this world had moved from small workshops to industrial mass production. Well done. Ren Baqin stroked the simple machine in front of him. He couldn't hide the happiness on his face, and he wasn't stingy with his praise. "Thank you, Your Highness." The person who spoke was Ling Du, one of the spirit wheel sword masters and one of the first 2 to come to Lan City. "Don't thank me. I should be the one thanking you. Your names will be remembered in history." Ren Baqin smiled. "If possible, we can exchange this honor for something else," Ling Du said bluntly. "What do you want?" Ren Baqin turned to look at him and the other spirit wheel sword masters. These people were treasures, real treasures. They were even more valuable than those top experts. There were many experts in this world, but there weren't many such treasures. Brothel. The youngest, Du Mingyang, was interrupted before he could finish speaking. Cough cough. A violent cough interrupted him. An old man glared at him and said, "Vulgar." The old man was called Zhen Yong. He turned and smiled at Rinpochen. It would be best if there was a Zhang Tai. Rinpochen thought about the word Zhang Tai and realized that it seemed to be another name for a brothel like a brothel. This term existed on Earth as well. According to the records of the Han Dynasty, there was a street in ancient Chang and called Zhang Tai. There were many brothels on the street, and the term Zhang Tai originated from this street. It wasn't surprising that there was such a term in this world. However, Rinpochen was still a little surprised that there was actually a term called Zhang Tai. He just didn't know if it meant what he thought it meant. Brothel? Rinpochen asked. Zhen Yong replied calmly, "A high-end, grand and classy brothel. It's not a place like a brothel. Children are ignorant." Rinpochen was surprised. This requirement wasn't low. To build a brothel in such a remote place? To specifically serve them? As if reading Rinpochen's mind, Zhen Yong said bluntly, "We want a prosperous world, not this desolate place. What's the difference between this and my previous life?" Rinpochen thought for a while and asked, "Do you want to get married?" Zhen Yong rolled his eyes and replied, "Not interested." "Actually, I'm still interested." Du Mingyang muttered. "What do you know? How can a domestic flower be better than a wild flower?" Zhen Yong turned his head and scolded. "You have to have a domestic flower first." Du Mingyang was obviously unconvinced. Rinpochen thought about it and agreed. "All right, I agree." At most, he would move to a brothel from the Yun nation. "Your Highness is very loyal." Zhen Yong was overjoyed and gave a thumbs up. Rinpochen smiled and changed the topic to the milling machine that they were currently making. "How is it? Can you make a 0.1 mm precision milling machine?" "It will take some effort and it will be scrapped if you're not careful," Zhen Yong said frankly. "However, it can still be made with some time. When I see a brothel, I will definitely let you see a 0.1 mm precision milling machine." "That's not enough. A 0.1 mm precision milling machine can't meet my requirements," Rinpochen said with a smile. Zhen Yong furrowed his eyebrows, frowned, and thought for a moment before gritting his teeth and saying, 0.07 mm precision is the most I can achieve without relying on other tools. Rinpochen laughed when he heard this. These people still had room to exploit. In fact, machines with a 0.01 mm precision could be found everywhere on Earth. They could only be considered street goods, and it was very easy for him to bring them over. However, technology would progress little by little. Otherwise, it would be a castle in the air. Being able to achieve this in such a short time in such a simple environment was enough to satisfy Rinpochen. These people were really treasures. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1000. Rinpochen came to the laboratory not only to look at the machine tools but also to obtain a thick stack of data. This included standard atmospheric pressure, gravity, elemental table, air composition, soil composition, and so on. This was the basis of the development of science and technology in this world. For these things, 3 experts went to the Yun nation under the protection of the winged cavalry warriors. Not to mention the novelty of what they saw and heard along the way, this data would at least allow Rinpochen to modify some of the teaching materials at the academy. For example, the atmospheric pressure in this world was 1 times that of Earth. However, Rinpochen had done experiments at the academy and found that the boiling point of water was about 106 degrees Celsius, which meant that Lan City was more than 1,000 meters above sea level. At the same time, the gravity in this world was slightly higher than that of Earth. These experts felt more tired when they first came to this world than on Earth. According to their observations and some speculations, the planet in this world was larger than Earth, rotated faster than Earth, and was further away from the star than from Earth to the Sun. As for the specific data, it would take a long time to come up with it. The air in this world was composed of only 72% nitrogen and 25% oxygen. There was one more rare gas than on Earth, which made up a total of 4%. The biggest difference between this world and Earth was that there was an important gas in the air that made up more than 5%. This gas was very active at high temperatures and could easily react with a variety of elements. Rinpochen stayed at Zongshishan for a night and approved 2 batches of experts' applications to expand the sampling area. The next day he returned to Lon City with the thick stack of data. With these people he had a lot less to worry about. As expected, professional matters should be left to the professionals to handle. After returning to Lon City, Renbachien stopped for a while on Jingyang Street. There were 3 gates and 4 roads in Lon City. The intersection of the 4 roads was in the middle, which was also the most prosperous area in the entire city. A little south of this intersection, there was a 3-story brick building that was much taller than the other 2-story buildings. The bricks were decorated with large pieces of white jade. White jade was still stone, but its color was similar to white jade. It was a mineral deposit that had been discovered during a recent mine exploration and was more valuable as a decoration than its original material. This small building was 6 storefronts wide, and with the white jade decorations, it looked quite luxurious. It could be said that in the eyes of most people, the most luxurious building in Lon City was this newly built shop with the word silver hanging on its door. At this time there were many people outside the bank. People entered and came out one after another, holding a few pieces of paper in their hands. Their expressions were slightly uneasy. "Boss, can this thing really be spent?" One of the men leaned on the shoulder of the other man and waved the piece of paper in his hand. "It should be possible, right?" The burly man who was being held down had a face full of doubt. "His Majesty wouldn't lie to us. I still owe the restaurant a tael of silver. I don't know if they'll accept this." The other man's face was also somewhat gloomy. These were all people from the Public Order Bureau. If they were like this, then there was no need to mention ordinary people. He was used to using silver and copper, so when he suddenly received this kind of new paper, he felt that it was unreliable. "Didn't you see the notice? This thing can be exchanged for silver and copper here." Another burly man said from the side. "Nonsense, I want to see it, but the problem is that I don't understand it. They recognize me but I don't recognize them. Isn't this superfluous? Wouldn't it be better to just give them silver?" Someone muttered. Renbachien watched quietly from afar. That's right, it was indeed superfluous at the moment. After all, these banknotes weren't recognized by the people outside. Regardless of whether they were used to buy things or do other things, they had to be exchanged for silver first. However, this was, after all, a beginning. When these people got used to using these banknotes to exchange for silver and copper, and when the people started to get used to it, these banknotes could be directly used for exchange in the market. Renbachien had a series of plans to use these banknotes to promote them. His goal was to allow banknotes to be used in most places in Dayo within 3 years. "This is Her Majesty, right?" Someone sitting on a horse said to the people around him while distinguishing the patterns on the banknotes. They were Bai Shiying, the head of the Public Order Bureau, and Tai Yen, the head of the Department of Supervision. Their salaries weren't even 100 taels of silver, and they were probably here to watch the show. They had changed the banknotes from the largest to the smallest denominations. It must be. Her Majesty is actually drawn on this. Who is this? Zhao Prince Consort. Look at the sun. Zhao Prince Consort is beside Her Majesty's banknote. Her Majesty is beside Zhao Prince Consort's banknote. The two of them are even looking at each other. Why do I feel like I've been fed something? I'm suddenly in a bad mood. After the two of them finished speaking, they turned around and saw Renbachien smiling brightly. Zhao Prince Consort is here. You and Her Majesty. What did you say? Tai Yen turned to look at Bai Shiying. Bai Shiying frowned, pondered, and suddenly realized something. Like chewing wax. Is this how it is? It should be. Renbachien said playfully. Her Majesty will definitely be happy to hear that. Of course. Bai Shiying laughed heartily. I've even studied a few books. They are all in the stomach of a dog, Renbachien cursed. The 3 of them exchanged some pleasantries and left in a hurry, saying that they were going to the brothel to take a look at something for their little babies. Renbachien turned around and returned to the palace. These banknotes were denominated in silver. The largest denomination was 100 taels of silver, which was equivalent to 100 taels of silver. Below that, there were 50 taels of silver, 20 taels of silver, 10 taels of silver, 5 taels of silver, 1 tael of silver. The lowest was up to 1 centimeter of silver, which was equivalent to 1. Embossed printing and watermarking were used to prevent counterfeiting. Cotton and 2 other plants were added to the banknotes and mixed in a certain proportion to make the banknotes harder. With these techniques, it would be difficult to imitate them for at least 20 years. In addition, there was a warning on the banknotes that said, "Counterfeiters will be punished with capital punishment." On the 100 taels of silver note was the portrait of the Empress. She was looking sideways at the only blank spot on the banknote. In the blank spot was his Mercury, which was looking at the Empress. The 50 taels of silver and 100 taels of silver were polar opposites. On the 20 taels of silver note was a map of Dayo, including the current Yin nation. On the 10 taels of silver were the Aboriginals, the Jing tribe and the people of the Yin nation. On the 5 taels of silver were the armies. On the 1 tael of silver was the train. The Empress was sitting in the palace and watching a TV series. She hadn't gotten tired of watching it for so many years. She sighed when she heard the whimpering sounds coming from outside. She was back after 2 days of peace. Your Majesty. Rinpochen left Lu Hua outside. After entering the hall, he hugged the Empress and casually complained, "When I came back just now, I saw the officers from the Public Order Bureau and the Inspection Bureau. According to them, we were like chewing wax." The Empress thought for a while before she understood what he meant. Her face turned cold as she said, "They are itching for a beating again. They even dare to make up gossip about me." Rinpochen agreed and said, "I think so too. First set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1001. Brother, sister-in-law, you are back. Wanyan opened the door and laughed at Rinpochen and the Empress. Although Rinpochen rarely saw him nowadays, they had a good relationship. Rinpochen felt that this was probably because he always beat him up when he was young. "Yuqing, call me uncle." Rinpochen patted Chi Yuqing's head and laughed. Erhua looked at Rinpochen, thought for a while and pointed to herself. "Father." The smile on Rinpochen's face froze. Rinpochen stretched out his claws, grabbed Erhua's face and twisted it. "What do you want to call me?" Erhua looked reluctant. With tears in her eyes, she called out in a childish voice, "Uncle." Rinpochen laughed. "Brother, why bother with a child? A child's words carry no harm." Rinpochen smiled and shook his head. It took him half a year to correct Erhua's belief that she should call him father. However, he didn't change her habit of letting others call her father. In fact, although Erhua was only 1 year old, she was already 1 meters tall, and her intelligence was comparable to that of a 3 or 4-year-old child. However, Rinpochen found that this child was extremely stubborn. It took him half a year to correct her belief that she should call herself father, and her habit of letting others call her father. At this time, Erhua was wearing a set of white clothes that imitated the Empress's style, covered with indigo muslin and tied her hair in a ponytail. She looked refreshing and delicate, and her face was lovable. This set of clothes was able to slightly conceal her sinewy muscles. However, she still looked a lot bigger than an ordinary child. A year had passed, but her muscles hadn't decreased at all. This made Rinpochen feel a little sad. The sweet little jacket in his heart had now become a Gundam. When he entered the door, his parents were there as well as Rin Wanyan's wife and son, a boy about 10 years old. He looked delicate and obedient, and his name was Rin Xia. "This is brother." Rinpochen pointed to the boy. Erhua stubbornly pointed to herself. "Father." She quickly corrected herself under Rinpochen's finger. "Brother." Rin Xia happily came over to look at this sudden addition of a younger sister. "Go and play with Big Brother. You're not allowed to push Big Brother, bump into Big Brother or hit Big Brother." Rinpochen repeated the 3 dantes again and put the little fellow aside. "Let me show you something good." Rin Xia acted like an older brother and called Honeysuckle over to look at his treasure. It was a game console that projected itself in the air. Honeysuckle looked at the little person running in the air with a face full of curiosity. After thinking for a moment, he firmly opened his mouth, revealing his eerie white teeth, but he bit down on nothing, so he immediately felt wronged. Rin Xia was amused by Honeysuckle's reaction. "That's fake. It's a projection." He even introduced his favorite console, the PS666, to Honeysuckle. Of course, he emphasized on games. Honeysuckle obviously didn't listen to those words. He stared at the game console with interest for a while, then poked it with his finger to make sure it was real. Then he revealed his white teeth. Rinpochen had just sat down for 3 minutes when he saw Rin Xia running over in a panic and complaining, "She ate my game console? Did you eat it?" Rin Wanyan looked at him and found it funny. "Then let her eat it." Obviously, there was a serious discrepancy between what he thought and the reality. Rinpochen slapped his forehead and disappeared from the sofa. Honeysuckle was sitting on the floor and chewing happily. Chips, metal shells and other fragments kept popping out of his mouth. All that was left on the floor were these scraps. The Empress was 1 step ahead of Rinpochen. When Rinpochen arrived, she had already picked up Honeysuckle and slapped his butt a few times. Rinpochen thought for a while and decided to appease the Empress before letting Honeysuckle spit out those things. Fortunately, it was the game console that I bit and not Rinxia. The Empress's hand paused for a moment, then she slapped him even harder. Meanwhile, Renwanyan's face changed color. For the rest of the day, Honeysuckle sat beside the Empress. However, it was as if there were nails under his butt and he couldn't sit steadily. His body swayed left and right and his eyeballs kept rolling. Even if his butt wasn't swollen, she still couldn't sit steadily. Honeysuckle was astonishingly full of energy and curiosity. He was curious about everything around him almost all the time. The others looked at Honeysuckle in surprise. After all, a child who could eat a game console in a few mouthfuls was amazing enough. The family gathering ended just like that, and Honeysuckle left a deep impression on everyone. Compared to the scene of sweeping away everything they heard, this family gathering gave everyone a more direct understanding of this little fellow. After that auction, Rinpochen sold 2 more batches of tractors, totaling 3,000 tractors. Among them, 1,000 were given to the Aboriginals. Similarly, after that auction, the Aboriginals' enthusiasm for tractors finally exploded. Although tractors weren't cost-effective in agriculture, they had irreplaceable value in long-distance transportation. Of course, the long-distance transportation company that Rinpochen set up played an important role in this. This was also the prototype of logistics. The Jing tribe was responsible for lobbying merchants in the Yun Nation to transport goods to Lan City through the transportation company. This saved them the trouble of setting up their own caravans, and it also allowed merchants who weren't strong enough to transport goods between the two places, invigorating the market. Since Rinpochen applied many of the mature rules and regulations of the logistics company from the very beginning, the long-distance transportation company, which appeared to be quite formal from the beginning, gained the recognition of a large number of small and medium-sized merchants in a very short period of time, and a steady stream of transportation orders followed. Not only did they transport goods, but they also transported people. Although it wasn't very comfortable, comfort wasn't the most important thing for those small and medium-sized merchants. With a sufficient market, the transportation company would naturally develop and grow in a short period of time. Having a tractor was a ticket to enter the long-distance transportation company. It could be said that Rinpochen had put in a lot of effort for the Aboriginals. He had used all kinds of methods. However, he could also understand that these reckless and straightforward people took a long time to accept new things. After this new initiative was announced, at first, only the various families and a small number of Aboriginals participated with the mentality of trying it out. After the first batch of people saw the sweetness, more Aboriginal people finally became enthusiastic. In just a few months, this long-distance transportation company had set up a fleet of nearly 1,000 tractors to transport goods between the two places. Including the families and big merchants from the Yun Nation, there were thousands of tractors traveling on this national highway every day. What followed were all kinds of traffic accidents. For example, people used their feet to hold the tractor's nose firmly in place and swung it to hit people. Some people used the tractor to drift, some people carried the tractor to forcibly overtake other cars. There were also 2 tractors traveling side by side and fighting while driving. The most amazing thing was that 4 people carried 2 tractors and kicked each other while running wildly. Due to the collision, the 2 tractors couldn't move, which resulted in such a scene. All these situations were an eye-opener for Rinpochen. It had to be said that every world had its own way of playing. After accepting the new concept of tractors, the Aboriginals also burst out with amazing creativity, and a large number of magical old drivers from another world emerged. The tractor, coupled with their strong individual strength, made them look like they were racing cart riders. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1002. There was an endless stream of tractors, carriages and pedestrians on the official road from Lan City to the Yun Nation. Ever since the construction of this road, it had brought abundant vitality to these 2 areas. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call this road the main artery of Dayo, the giant. At this time, a group of 100 cavalrymen was rushing on the wide road, passing by a tractor carrying a lot of goods from time to time. This new type of transportation had gradually replaced the previous ox carts and carriages. This trend was getting faster and faster. Although the cement road was flat, it required a lot of animal power. The people here didn't understand the role of animal power, but they understood that it was because the road was too hard. The horses needed to rest after a few trips on the cement road. Every 100 kilometers along this road, there was a so-called relay station where people could rest, eat, sell biodiesel, and inspect and repair tractors. This made everyone feel convenient and at ease. The sky was getting dark, and the 100 cavalrymen stopped in front of a relay station. The relay station was located at the side of the road. It had been expanded into an area of several thousand square meters, and there was a row of two-story brick buildings. Just like the new buildings in Lan City, they had a completely different style from the previous buildings. The walls were made of red bricks and they were covered with plants that looked quite exquisite. The tempting aroma of food was coming from a small building near the edge. "Stop, get off your mounts and rest." Following the leader's order, the cavalrymen stopped one after another, jumped off their mounts and tied them to the animal pen at the side. The 100 jumping goats only took up 1/3 of the space. Everyone entered the relay station and saw a row of electric lights hanging above the lobby. Like the street lights in Lan City, they didn't require grease or other combustibles, and there was no choking smoke. They were clean and bright. The hall was very big and there were dozens of wooden tables. Most of them were occupied. The Aboriginal tractor drivers who were dressed in animal skins, the Yun Nation merchants who were dressed in silks, the solemn-looking guards and the low-profile Jing tribe people who were sitting in the corner were all sitting in the hall. Occasionally the sweet voices of girls could be heard. The entrance of the 100 cavalrymen attracted a lot of attention, but they looked away after seeing their attire. The words "Dukkha" were written on their clothes, and the saber at their waist was the standard long saber of the winged cavalry. It was 3 times longer and 1 times wider than the saber of the ordinary Aboriginal army. Rinpoche did not know what new department this was. New departments often appeared in Dayo, such as the Department of Commerce, the newly established Department of Transportation, and the Department of Price. Although they didn't know which department they were from, everyone could tell that these people were from the winged cavalry. When traveling outside, one's eyes had to be sharp. These merchants who traveled this road all year round knew this principle very well. The one in front was a woman with a scorpion tattoo on her cheek. Nearly 100 burly men were also brimming with murderous auras. When they looked at people, their gazes seemed to be filled with provocation and ridicule. The 100 people sat at 10 tables, ordered roasted meat, vegetable broth, roasted potatoes and wine, and began to eat in silence. However, he also paid attention to his surroundings while eating. Soon the few of them stopped eating and looked to the side. A man dressed in embroidered clothes walked towards them. "May I ask if this is Lieutenant Hua?" The man cupped his fists at the leading lady and smiled. "Who are you?" Hua Qinghua raised her head and glanced at him. "Last time at the bank I was saved by military officer Hua. Unfortunately, I didn't have the chance to meet him after that. Since we've met by chance today, I wonder if I can invite Captain Hua to have a drink with everyone? This is just a small token of my appreciation." "Are you done?" Hua Qinghua looked at the roasted meat in front of her without batting an eyelid. "I'm done." "You're delaying my meal." Hua Qinghua's meaning was obvious. "You're a hindrance, so get lost." The middle-aged man didn't look too surprised. Although he felt a little awkward, he still maintained his gentlemanly manner and cupped his fists at Hua Qinghua. "In that case I shall take my leave. Thank you, Military Officer Hua, for the previous matter." Hua Qinghua didn't say anything and continued to serve the roasted meat in front of her. The middle-aged man returned to his seat and laughed self-deprecatingly. "You must have suffered a setback." The man sitting at the same table with him was a wealthy merchant of similar age. "As expected," the middle-aged man replied. "Aboriginals are all rocks. The kind that can't be moved." The wealthy merchant laughed softly. The middle-aged man agreed with him. However, he was still a little concerned about the Imperial Inspector uniform that Hua Qinghua and the others were wearing. Previously, when Hua Qinghua and the others arrived, everyone heard the sound of hooves and knew that they were heading toward the Yun Nation. They didn't know what to do. This incident was just a small interlude. Hua Qinghua and the others rested at the relay station for a night before continuing their journey. 2 days later, everyone arrived at Pingdu. First, they obtained some information from the rearguard commandery, rested for a night, inquired about some matters, and then headed straight for the protectorate of Yun Nation. After some time, Hua Qinghua finally saw Zidonglai. Zidonglai was a handsome man who looked to be in his 30s. His face looked as if it had been carved by a knife or an axe. It was angular, and his eyes were full of spirit. If one were to say that Zidonglai was the most handsome man of the Aboriginals, there wouldn't be many people who would object. Even Hua Qinghua was momentarily dazed when she saw Zidonglai. Imperial Inspector? Never heard of it. Why are you here? Zidonglai sat at the seat of honor and asked faintly. Hua Qinghua became serious and took out an imperial edict. The gist of it was that the imperial inspector was responsible for investigating the conflicts and contradictions between the aboriginals and the Yun Nation people in the Yun Nation, as well as investigating the harassment of the civilians by the soldiers of the Protectorate of the Northeast. Zidonglai's eyes flickered and turned a little colder. Is this the intention of Her Majesty or Zhao Prince Consort? Since it was personally written by Her Majesty, it naturally has her intention. Hua Qinghua flipped the imperial edict over and showed it to Zidonglai. The Yun Nation is newly settled, and there are many revolts among the civilians, Zidonglai said with a cold face. In fact, Zidonglai always had a cold face. It's one thing to rebel, but it's another thing for the soldiers of the Protectorate of Yun Nation to harass the civilians. Hua Qinghua took out another piece of paper from her waist and said, on the 11th of September, Commandant Tai Fengbao beat up a local merchant, Li Jingwen, after drinking in a brothel, seriously injuring him. On the 19th of September, Commandant Qin Hui's soldiers collided with someone on the road and started a fight with the local people. Huang Chu, Shendu, and 13 other people were seriously injured. On the 6th of October, Commandant Su Sanhua and his soldiers beat up 4 scholars, Yuan Qing, Lu Dong, and 2 others in a restaurant. After that, their names were left behind and had a bad influence. 11th of October. Enough. You're well prepared. They are all my soldiers. What are you going to do about it, Imperial Inspector? Zidonglai waved his hand and interrupted Hua Qinghua. In the past 3 months, there have been 13 cases of harassment of civilians in Pingdu alone. There are even more cases in the entire Yun Nation. According to Her Majesty's order, these people must be punished according to military law. Moreover, they must be punished in an eye-catching place in the city to serve as a warning to others. They should be punished according to military law. Even if it's an order from Her Majesty, I won't accept it. Zidonglai stood up after finishing his sentence. All of you may leave. Protector Z, are you going to defy the order? Hua Qinghua moved in front of Zidonglai in a flash. How dare you? The guards in the tent were furious. You dare to stop me? Zidonglai looked at Hua Qinghua with a dangerous coldness in his eyes. Protector Z, the order is from Her Majesty. I, the Imperial Inspector, have the duty to investigate such matters. Hua Qinghua blocked his way without backing down. If you defy the order, Her Majesty will definitely be furious. I, Zidonglai, and the soldiers of the Protectorate have made great contributions to the Yun Nation. Even if I have some flaws, I can't be punished in public. I refuse to accept Her Majesty's order. You can go back and report to Her Majesty. If Her Majesty wants to punish me, I'm willing to accept it. Hua Qinghua saw that Zidonglai had made up his mind and gritted her teeth. She had just arrived, but Protector Z had already refused to accept the order. This job was indeed difficult. Just as she was feeling angry, she felt a strong force pushing her away. Zidonglai waved his hand in the air, causing her to retreat several steps. By the time Hua Qinghua came back to her senses, Zidonglai had already left the tent. Hua Qinghua quickly chased after him. Stop. Zidonglai's guard stopped Hua Qinghua. I have Her Majesty's order, so I can move freely. Who can stop me? Hua Qinghua sneered and took out the order from her pocket. The guard's morale immediately stagnated. Zidonglai glanced at her, snorted coldly, and left without bothering with her. However, he didn't expect Hua Qinghua to follow him blindly. Whether he was eating or sleeping, Hua Qinghua would definitely appear by his side and read out the Empress's orders from time to time. If it were someone else, Zidonglai would have killed them with a slap. However, Hua Qinghua had the Empress's order. After a period of time, Zidonglai was quite annoyed. He couldn't beat her up or chase her away, so he simply instructed the guards to curse at Hua Qinghua and force her to retreat. He didn't expect Hua Qinghua to curse so badly that the guards couldn't open their mouths. However, Zidonglai couldn't do as the imperial edict said and let the soldiers receive military law in the streets and be surrounded by the people of the Yun Nation. This was the stubbornness of a general. No matter what they had done, they were still his soldiers. How could he allow them to be humiliated in front of others? The two sides continued to be in a deadlock. When Rinpochen received the news, he felt rather helpless. Hua Qinghua's dogskin plaster tactic was suggested by him. After all, Zidonglai was extremely famous and had made great contributions. Even the Empress wouldn't easily touch him. However, if these matters weren't dealt with, the people of the Yun Nation would always be hostile to the Aboriginals. In order to absorb a nation as a part of Dayo, A combination of strength and gentleness had to be used. Rewards and punishments had to be fair. Zidonglai had no choice but to make such a move. Now he just had to wait and see how long Zidonglai could endure. Rinpoche put this aside and waited for Zidonglai's reaction. He still had too many things to do and couldn't put too much energy into this. A year had passed and the two were still in a deadlock. Hua Qinghua moved directly to the protectorate and was like Zidonglai's shadow every day. Even Zidonglai's guards and the generals from the protectorate were used to her presence. Hua Qinghua never forgot her duties. Almost every day she would read the Empress's orders to Zidonglai. At the same time she would also get her subordinates to bring news of the harassment of the people by the protectorate soldiers. Perhaps it was due to her efforts, but such incidents seemed to have decreased in the past 6 months. 2 years had passed and Rinpoche sometimes almost forgot about this matter. Today he had just finished looking at the phone sample that had just been produced and asked about Hua Qinghua's current situation. He didn't expect Zidonglai to be able to hold on for so long, which made Rinpoche feel rather helpless. Your Highness, I just received news that Protector General Z is going to marry Hua Duka in 3 months. Rinpoche was confused. Rinpoche's expression suddenly became extremely interesting. He felt depressed and didn't know what to say. That feeling was as if he had been F***ed. Chapter 1003. Although it had been 2 years, only 1 year and 7 months had actually passed. Logically speaking, Rinpoche should be happy about Zidonglai's wedding. He didn't have much of a relationship with Zidonglai. However, the descendants of such experts wouldn't be too talented. For example, Hongwu's granddaughter, Hong Xian, had officially broken through to the Cardinal Heaven level 2 months ago. A 28-year-old Cardinal Heaven expert was considered one of the most talented among the Aboriginals. Every talented newcomer would be the foundation for the future fight against the foreign races. Rinpoche had always regarded the foreign races as his goal, so he should be happy to know about Zidonglai's wedding. However, he felt like he had been F***ed. In his heart, he naturally felt like he was hitting a dog with a meat bun and it would never come back. He had carefully selected Hua Qinghua and sent her to the Yun Nation. He had lobbied the Empress to set up the Bureau of Investigation, thought up a plan for her, and asked for the warrant from the Empress. However, Zidonglai had been holding back for less than 2 years and had eaten the meat bun. This made Rinpoche want to curse, but he didn't know how to say it. Give me all the information related to the Bureau of Investigation for the past 2 years. Rinpoche sighed softly. He took a stack of information back to the palace and spent 2 hours sorting out the situation over the past 1.5 years. Although the meat bun couldn't be returned, it wasn't without gains during this period. At the very least, the soldiers from the Protectorate of the Northeast harassed and beat up the people of the Yun Nation by about 70%. This became more and more obvious in recent times. Whether it was because Zidonglai was annoyed by her pestering, or because the generals from the Protectorate of the Northeast were flirting with Zidonglai, there were still some effects. This credit still belonged to Hua Qinghua. Rinpoche leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes and pondered. Under the current situation, Hua Qinghua didn't need to be removed from her position, and it might be useful to keep her status as an inspector. Hua Qinghua wasn't willing to let Zidonglai be her master and might even be able to suppress him. In any case, he still had the trump card of the rearguard commandery in his hands, and he could report the situation of the Yun Nation and the Bureau of Investigation at any time. Having made up his mind, Rinpoche opened his eyes and saw that the Empress had unknowingly returned. She was sitting there with her legs crossed and a wine glass in her hand, gently swirling it. Did Her Majesty go to the garden? Rinpoche laughed. She turned her head and said, "These days the flowers in the garden aren't gorgeous. I heard that if 2 people are buried there, the flowers will bloom exceptionally brightly." Who provoked Your Majesty again? Rinpoche went over and hugged the Empress. Then he took the wine cup from her hand and drank it in one gulp. The Qin nation has sent an envoy, the Empress said faintly. And then? I don't like people who are too ugly. For the Qin nation to send 2 people like this, I'm sure they're intentionally insulting me. The Empress immediately categorized the Qin nation as being disrespectful to her. Rinpoche smiled. This was indeed the Empress's temperament. Other than her own people, she had always done as she pleased with outsiders. Even if it was Li Yuanzhu, she would be chased away without any hesitation. Not to mention the 2 envoys from the Qin state. Do you want me to meet him? It's too late. Their heads are hanging at the top of the city wall now. The Empress supported her chin with one hand and played with the empty wine cup with the other. She put her finger into the cup and used the pad of her finger to rub the drops of liquid on the wall of the cup. It's just that I haven't killed anyone in a long time, and it's not easy to find 2 corpses to bury in the garden. However, the 2 corpses have already been hung at the top of the city wall, and it doesn't seem appropriate to let someone pluck them and bury them in the garden. The Empress was conflicted about whether to bury the 2 corpses in the garden. Rinpoche thought about it and advised, Erhua likes to pick up random things to eat. The Empress finally gave up the idea of burying the 2 corpses in the garden after hearing this. The flowers in the garden aren't blooming well. Just fertilize them, Rinpoche added. The Empress, who had just given up on burying the corpses in the garden, immediately changed her mind and ordered, someone take down the 2 corpses from the top of the city wall and bury them in the garden. Rinpoche took out another wine cup, poured himself some wine and said to the Empress, Protector General Z is getting married in 3 months. The Empress was stunned. Why didn't I know? It has just been decided and will be reported to Your Majesty in another 2 days. Zidonglai has worked hard and performed a great service. I will take this opportunity to give him a big gift to show his honor. I need to prepare a gift as well. Rinpoche laughed. He was planning to give Zidonglai 100 adult magazines, a projector and 10 action blockbusters. He wondered if Zidonglai could have a few more children. He always had a great plan in mind that was as great as the human restoration plan, the human reproduction plan. Where's Erhua? Rinpoche suddenly remembered that he had been back for more than 2 hours, but he didn't seem to hear Erhua shouting. For this energetic girl this was rare. I didn't see her either. The Empress said faintly. Rinpoche called the guards to look for her, and Zhu Hua rushed over shortly after. She was hiccuping all the way and her face was flushed. Your Majesty, the little princess is missing. What did you do? The Empress looked at her coldly. Rinpoche smelled a faint sweet scent in the air after she came in. It was very familiar. It was the smell of the golden ring honey. Ever since he tasted it in the 60,000 mountains, Shiwanya would send a few jars as tribute every year. Consuming this honey was similar to taking Diu, and it could make one feel like they were on cloud 9 and hallucinate. Did Erhua give you the honey? Rinpoche asked. Yes. It was quite delicious and then I had a dream. Zhu Hua scratched her head. She obviously hadn't recovered from the fact that she was knocked down by Erhua. Rinpoche rubbed his eyebrows. She was actually knocked down by a child who wasn't even 3 years old. With Zhu Hua's intelligence, there was no value in saving her. Everyone search. We must find Yu Qing. The Empress ordered with a sullen face. Rinpoche got up, put his hands behind his back and paced a few steps on the ground. Did Erhua eat the honey? Rinpoche looked up and asked. Zhu Hua thought deeply and then looked at Rinpoche blankly. Obviously, she didn't pay attention to this question at all. Rinpoche sighed. Asking her was indeed a waste of time. He thought about it carefully. Although Erhua wasn't even 3 years old, her intelligence was equivalent to that of a 7 or 8-year-old child. She must have made preparations to knock Zhu Hua down. Since Erhua wasn't found, she probably didn't eat the golden ring honey. She definitely didn't go through all this trouble just to play in the palace. That lass might have run out of the house. As for how she ran out, he would only know after he caught her. Your Majesty, let's go out of the palace and have someone guard the city gates while you're at it. Search the city, Rinpoche said to the Empress. He wasn't too worried about Erhua's safety. One had to know that Erhua was at the advanced level of Kismet Heaven. Although she had no combat experience, she wasn't someone that ordinary people could bully. Moreover, with her strength, those who could defeat her would definitely know her identity. He wasn't worried about her safety. However, today, Erhua would probably have to face a mixed double. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1004. 4 hours ago. Below the Dayo Palace, there were many underground tunnels that looked like a spider's web. At this moment, a small figure was walking in the tunnels with her body bent. Even though it was pitch black, she didn't bump into the walls even once. Her long hair was tied into a ponytail. Her hair was originally 4 meters long, but after being accidentally tangled in a certain area, she finally endured the pain and cut it into ankle-length short hair. Honeysuckle's eyes seemed to emit some kind of light in the darkness. From time to time, she would identify the direction at the intersection, or reach out to grab a bug from the soil at the side and throw it into her mouth. She would also listen to the sounds above her head and push away the soil above her to identify her position. After spending half an hour, Honeysuckle realized that there was no way forward. There was a huge rock blocking her way and there was light coming from the edge of the rock. Wow! Honeysuckle cheered. She went forward and pushed the rock with her meaty little palm, creating a gap. Honeysuckle squeezed out of the gap and realized that this place was completely different from the places she had seen before. It was a courtyard surrounded by stone walls. There was a river, a rock garden, and many ice blocks piled there. A white bear was lying comfortably on top of the ice cubes. The moment it saw Honeysuckle, the bear raised its head, let out a roar, and revealed a mouth full of sharp teeth. Honeysuckle looked curiously at the white animal in front of her. In her memory, her father seemed to have brought her to see it before. Honeysuckle curiously moved closer and wanted to touch it. In her past experience, the furry things she had touched included the roaring emperor, Tian, Gun, and the golden retriever. All of them allowed her to pinch them. However, the white bear in front of her was obviously different from the ones she had seen before. The tasty little fellow in front of it seemed to remind it of its days in the wild. It stood on its hind legs and let out a warning roar at Honeysuckle. Seeing that Honeysuckle approached it fearlessly and tried to seize its territory, the enraged white bear raised its huge paw and swung it at the little fellow. Honeysuckle, who had encountered such a situation for the first time, was at a loss. Her small figure in front of the huge white bear felt like she was facing a giant in a fairy tale. She allowed the huge bear's paw to reach her side before she hurriedly threw a punch as if she had just woken up from a dream. Crack! The front limbs of the white bear were twisted into strange shapes, and the white bear let out a mournful roar. The fear of being slapped by a woman in red all those years ago resurfaced in his mind. The white bear shuddered and gave up its precious land, the ice mountain, and curled its body into a ball. Honeysuckle, who had just been startled, was a little annoyed. Looking at the white bear that had curled up into a ball, he wanted to bully it, but he couldn't bear to do so. He thought about how he wouldn't be out for too long this time, and how excited he was about the outside world, so he suppressed the thought of bullying the bear. With a tap of his toes, he jumped over the wall. He wandered aimlessly around the beast park. He couldn't tell where he was going and had to hide whenever he saw someone. A few children were playing not far away. One of the children was facing the punches and kicks of the other children. In just a few moves, he had beaten the other children to the ground, causing their heads to bleed. The adults in the distance did not seem to care. They only laughed when they saw this and praised the strongest child. Tai-Tu, you're the strongest among these kids. You might even become a high-ranking official in the future. Honeysuckle curled his lips in the dark. He was much stronger than him. He only needed one little finger to press him to the ground. However, his father and mother had never praised him like this before. This simple praise actually made Honeysuckle feel a little envious. The small figure first jumped onto a house. From here he could see the main gate. After identifying the direction, he lightly jumped down again. Only half of his hair fell. Honeysuckle's hair was unexpectedly caught by something. He only fell about a meter high before he was suspended in the air. Although no one saw such a delicate little person hanging there, Honeysuckle, who was suspended in the air, looked at the top of his head and then at the bottom of his feet. His mouth twitched and he almost cried. Fortunately, he remembered that he was sneaking out of the palace, so he forcefully held back his tears. He grabbed his hair alternately with both hands and climbed up just like that. The roof of the beast park was made of wood and straw. Honeysuckle's hair was caught by a piece of wood. After discovering the culprit, Honeysuckle pouted and angrily broke the wood to free his hair. Crack! Who's there? Honeysuckle was startled when he heard the shout from below. He quickly dashed in the direction he was looking for previously. The people below only saw a small figure disappear in a flash. They were immediately startled and shouted loudly, immediately attracting the attention of others. However, he didn't even see the figure clearly. He only saw a shadow and couldn't tell who it was. He only remembered that the person seemed to be very small. However, no one expected that it was the little princess who had sneaked out of the palace. After discussing it, they reported it to the chief and then to their superiors. At this time, Honeysuckle had already disappeared. She saw the palace when she went out of the door. Then she knew which direction to go. After all, her father had brought her out of the palace more than once or twice. She more or less remembered the way. After avoiding the square in front of the palace, Honeysuckle immediately cheered when she arrived at Jianghu Street. Wow! She had finally sneaked out. Looking at the surging crowd in front of her, Honeysuckle felt excited from the bottom of her heart. Although she had seen it before, it was in her father's arms every time. She had never seen it so clearly and so close to her. The cheerful honeysuckle immediately pounced into the surging crowd like a husky that had escaped its reins. After walking for a short distance, honeysuckle's eyes narrowed. There was a fragrance. What a fragrant smell. Following the direction of the fragrance, she could smell that it was coming from a small building. If she could read, she would have recognized the 3 words Shanhuai House on the small building. Although Honeysuckle was illiterate on her first trip out, she remembered that she had smelled the fragrance from this house when she was in her father's arms. Squatting on the opposite side, she saw a few youths walk in with their heads held high. Not long after, a few more youths walked out with their heads held high. Honeysuckle immediately knew what was going on. Mimicking them, Honeysuckle walked through the crowd with her head held high. However, when she saw a bunch of tables and people sitting around them, Honeysuckle was dumbfounded. What should she do next? "Girl, what do you want to eat?" The one who spoke was a burly and fierce-looking waiter. The scar on his face twitched as he spoke. In other places, he would definitely be a character that would stop children from crying at night. At this moment, he was also sizing up the young girl who looked to be around 7 or 8 years old. She wore a white silk dress on the inside and a blue muslin dress on the outside. This kind of dress was not something that ordinary people could afford. Only the young ladies in Shanhuai House could afford to wear it. Her hair was tied into a single ponytail that reached the back of her ankles, and her small face was extremely exquisite. Needless to say, she was the son of some big shot in the imperial court. An ordinary family would not be able to raise such a child. From the blank look on her face, it was obvious that she rarely went out. "Miss, please take a seat first. What would you like to eat?" The burly man tried his best to make himself look pleasant. Honeysuckle looked around blankly and thought for a moment. The most delicious. Spiced lamb leg, braised lamb trotters, medium well-roasted beef and wild vegetable lamb stew. These are all the best. These are all recipes from the palace. The burly man said in a low, muffled voice. The palace? Honeysuckle pondered. Was the palace her home? Honeysuckle was a little uncertain. After thinking for a moment, Honeysuckle decided to eat first. "I want all of them." "All right," the burly man said loudly. Most aboriginals were big eaters. The more powerful they were, the more food they could eat. Even though the dishes here were served in bowls, it was not unusual for a little girl to order a table full of dishes. That girl from Minister Tong's family was only half full after eating a table full of dishes. Honeysuckle, on the other hand, had a face full of anticipation as she waited for the other party to cook for her. Eating in the same house with so many strangers was really too novel. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1005. Have you heard? It said that a truck has just been invented that can run several times faster than a tractor. What truck? Have you heard of steam trains? That thing's rails are about to reach Lan City. Lu San, didn't your second brother get arrested for stealing the rails? Is he still mining now? He snatched the rails and couldn't beat them. The person called Lu San's expression changed instantly as he spat on the ground and corrected him. The Aboriginals despised theft the most, and even commoners rarely stole things. On the other hand, stealing wasn't a big deal. 2 years ago, the price of iron was even more expensive than it was now. Lu San's second brother must have lost his mind and actually tried to snatch the rails with 2 scoundrel friends. In the end, he was overturned and was still mining in the mines. Looking at the time, it would be another year before he could be released. This matter was considered a great humiliation for his family. It wasn't because he tried to snatch the rails, but because he was overturned by the railway patrol team. One had to know that the Lu family was considered a respectable family, yet their son was so disappointing that he had been ridiculed for the past 2 years. The people around them heard the conversation at the table and burst into laughter. The second floor of Shanhuai restaurant was occupied by the children of the rich and powerful. The guests on the first floor were of lower status, but they were all officials in their families. Ordinary people wouldn't come here to eat at all. Even the merchants from the Yun nation wouldn't come here. Someone noticed Honeysuckle sitting there and asked with a smile, "Have you seen that child before?" He didn't mean any harm. He was just curious that she was sitting there alone despite her exquisite appearance and attire. "I haven't seen her before. I don't know which family she came from." Someone else glanced at her. "She's pretty. In a few years she'll probably be the one asking for her hand in marriage." The person who spoke was in his 20s, 20 years younger than Honeysuckle. He was also joking with the gaze of an elder looking at a junior. "Ordinary people won't be able to get close to her. The aboriginals were straightforward, but they weren't blind, especially the children of the officials. Putting everything else aside, ordinary people wouldn't be able to see anything special about the muslin robe he was wearing. However, looking at its breadth and fineness, it seemed to be an imitation of crystal silk. A bolt of it cost several hundred taels of silver. Even an ordinary official wouldn't be able to afford it, let alone a child. Everyone just chatted for a while and didn't take it to heart. Honeysuckle didn't care that he was being talked about. His face fell when he saw the dishes on the table. You ate this every day in the palace and you still want to eat this after coming out? Another table. Honeysuckle slammed the table and pouted. I don't want to eat this. Change another table. The waiter from before took a look and immediately removed the items on the table without any hesitation. This is our restaurant's most famous dish. If you don't like it, what else do you want to eat? Hua rolled his eyes and looked around, then pointed at a table and said, I want those from them. The waiter immediately reported the menu. Honeysuckle slammed the table and yelled, I want to drink. Hearing this, the surrounding people immediately burst into laughter. Little girl, how much can you drink? Someone laughed and shouted. Honeysuckle knew that everyone was calling him, but he didn't know what they were laughing about. When he heard the question, he immediately raised a finger. A bowl or a jar? Someone asked with a smile. It wasn't a big deal for Aboriginal children to drink a little wine. However, seeing such a cute little girl sitting at the table and asking for wine like a little adult was quite amusing. I can drink as much as I want, Honeysuckle said in her cute voice. Pfft. Hearing this, everyone immediately burst into laughter. Little girl, you're bragging, right? If you don't believe me, I'll show you. Give me wine. Honeysuckle was immediately unhappy when she heard someone questioning her. Haha, little girl, I'll treat you to a drink. Drink it first before we talk about anything else. Someone at the table next to her handed over half a jar of wine. It was the kind that contained 5 caddies of wine. Half a jar wasn't a small amount. Honeysuckle looked at the huge jar and was immediately dumbfounded. In the palace, she always drank the Empress's wine in secret, and they were all glass bottles. How was she going to drink such a big jar? Seeing her dumbfounded expression, everyone laughed again. Honeysuckle turned her head to see how the others drank. Coincidentally, she saw someone pouring wine from a jar and understood. She jumped onto a stool and poured herself a bowl of wine from the jar. Then she raised the bowl and drank it in one gulp. Good. Little girl, you're straightforward. Everyone cheered again. Honeysuckle frowned. It wasn't as good as the one she drank in secret. However, she quickly cheered up again. No one was here to control her, and she wouldn't be scolded by the Empress and her father. She poured another bowl and drank it in one gulp. Seeing that she wanted to drink again, someone said, Drink slowly, there's no rush. Honeysuckle wrinkled her nose. They had just said that she was bragging. She ignored them. Seeing that she drank another cup, everyone immediately cheered. It was rare for something interesting to happen in Shanhui House. Little girl, your face isn't even red. You can really drink. I wonder who taught you. Come, let's drink. A burly man laughed heartily and came over, clinking his bowl with honeysuckles. Seeing this, Honeysuckle became even more excited. Seeing that she really wasn't drunk at all, everyone took advantage of their enthusiasm and clinked glasses with her. Although Honeysuckle was surrounded by people every day in the palace, it was different here. Although the people here were a little rough, their enthusiasm and hearty laughter ignited something in her heart. Furthermore, she seemed to sense an unfamiliar emotion from these people's words: approval. In the palace, the Empress and her father treated her like a child. The people here were different. After Honeysuckle drank half the jar of wine, someone brought another jar of wine and invited her to drink. Shanhui House became even more lively. Everyone also began to see something different. It was true that Aboriginal children could drink a little, but this child had drunk so much without any reaction. This meant that her strength was far beyond that of an ordinary person. At the very least, she wasn't at the four-way heaven level. That meant that she was at the Kismet heaven level. To be able to reach the Kismet heaven stage at such a young age, only a few geniuses could compare to him, right? For example, Shurgan from the Great Elder's family and Tong Lan from Minister Tong's family. No one knew which family this girl belonged to, but she was actually so powerful. However, everyone was relieved. Since she was at the Kismet heaven level, they didn't have to worry about her drinking. With this little girl around, Shanhui House was especially lively today. Even the second floor was affected by the people downstairs. Someone hurried downstairs and saw a fair and delicate child standing on a stool with one foot on the table and the other on it. She was drinking bowl after bowl of wine. Many regulars of Shanhui House were cheering at the side, and every time, someone would drink with her. In just a short while there was a pile of wine jars on the floor. "Lu San, if you keep drinking you'll lose all of your food money for this month." "I can't lose to such a little girl. That would be embarrassing," the person called Lu San said fiercely. In fact, he had already lost a jar of wine to Honeysuckle, but he stubbornly refused to stop. The rich and powerful children who had come down to investigate went up and told them about this matter. Everyone else became curious and came down to see this little girl who could drink so much. "Which family is she from? Do you know?" "I've never seen her before." "Have you seen her before?" "No." "This little girl is interesting. I'll go up and drink with her." "So many of you are taking turns to fight a little girl. Aren't you embarrassed?" "This girl is interesting. Look at her. She drank so much but she's completely fine. I heard she just said that she could keep drinking. I want to see what she's talking about." At this moment Honeysuckle was very happy. She had never felt so carefree in her life. In her eyes everyone here was a good person. She really hoped that they would come to the palace to play with her. She didn't refuse anyone. Even if no one touched her bowl she would still drink. The sound of bowls clinking against bowls was endless. Even the passers-by outside could hear the loud cheers and toasts coming from Shanhui House. There was even a burly man who took off his clothes and jumped onto the table to sing a wild hunting song. With the first there was a second. The rough singing quickly spread from the house to the outside. In the crowd Honeysuckle copied the others. She held a bowl of wine in one hand and slammed the table with the other, shouting and laughing loudly. Chapter 1006. Ren Baqian and the Empress stood on the roof. Below them was Jianghu Street, which was a few meters wide, and across the road was the noisy Shanhui restaurant. Unlike before, there was almost no one on the second floor of Shanhui restaurant. Instead, the first floor was bustling with noise. Cheers and laughter could be heard from afar. The Empress moved her ears and caught a childish voice in the wind. "Bring her out," the Empress said with a sullen face. Ren Baqian looked at the crowded restaurant that was in full swing and fell into deep thought. Hua is drinking in there, and as his father, I'm being squeezed out. It's not good, right? It's too embarrassing, Ren Baqian said seriously. Almost no one was below the Kismet heaven level in the group. If he didn't reveal his name he probably wouldn't be able to squeeze in. Revealing his name just to squeeze in and drag Hua out? This momentum was too weak. The Empress looked at him resentfully and said, "I told you to focus on your cultivation, and now you know how to be embarrassed?" "I'm too busy. It's good enough that I can maintain Rui visualization every day." Ren Baqian wasn't trying to shirk his responsibilities, but he was really too busy. Ever since his wedding with the Empress, he hadn't been idle at all. There were too many things in his mind. There were too many things that needed to be developed in this world, and his mind was constantly thinking about them. How could he not race against time to develop to the level of technology that had been developed on Earth for 200 to 300 years in just a few decades? The Empress knew that he was busy, so she didn't say anything else and moved to the entrance of Shanhui restaurant. Before anyone could react, his surging aura smashed towards the people in the building like a tsunami. Immediately, the people who were still laughing were scattered all over the place. The Empress saw Hua, who was standing in the middle with one foot on a stool and the other on a table. His sleeves were rolled up, and he was holding a bowl of wine in one hand and a jar of wine in the other. At this moment, Hua was in a state of extreme shock and was completely dumbfounded. In the midst of the merriment, she had forgotten that she had snuck out. When she saw the Empress now, she was naturally shocked. Then she stuttered, "Mother? Mother." The Empress took a step forward and arrived at her side. She lifted her by the collar, took another step forward, and was already outside the door. In a few flashes, she had returned to the palace. After a moment of extreme shock, the people in Shanhui House finally burst out, "His Majesty came just now. It's actually the little princess. We were drinking with the little princess just now." The little princess is not even 3 years old yet, right? Only then did everyone realize that the little girl who had been drinking just now was actually the little princess. One could imagine the shock in their hearts. Ren Baqian stood at the door and coughed softly. He was also puzzled. He often brought Honeysuckle out, but no one recognized her? Zhao Prince Consort. Everyone turned to greet him. In the past, everyone looked down on Rinpoche. However, with the rapid changes in Dayo over the past 2 years, everyone only had respect for him. It wasn't just in Lan City but also in the Yun Nation, the Qin Nation and Great Xia. But this time, it wasn't because of Qi Zixiao's gigolo. If the Empress was said to be one of the most talented women in the world, then Rinpoche could be said to be one of the smartest people in the world. The various changes in Dayo and all kinds of novel but useful things had all been verified. It could be said that in just a few years Rinpoche had become famous all over the world. All of this couldn't be separated from the propaganda of the merchants of the Yun Nation. The auction of tractors and glass dealerships raked in 15 million taels of silver. Later, tractors with 30, 40 and 50 horsepower were introduced one after another, and a variety of technologies were introduced. This included the production of all kinds of paper and paper shells, the production techniques of toothbrushes, toothpaste, soap and other items, as well as the production methods of new distilled liquor, the production methods of candy, and the new textile technology. All of these were thrown out by him in one fell swoop. There was no other way as there was a shortage of people. Now that he couldn't even recruit workers, he could only abandon these industries and transfer the workers to more important industries. Of course, he also had plans to expand the market and share the profits with the other ministers. After all, everything was monopolized by the royal family, and it was too unsightly to enjoy such a good life. He directly threw these technologies to the ministers in the court. How could these ministers understand these things? Although they knew that they were good stuff, how many people could they have under them? At this time, Rinpoche gave them another idea. Join forces with the merchants of the Yun Nation. It was said to be an alliance. They would provide the technology, and the merchants of the Yun Nation would provide the money and labor. The profits would be split 70 to 30. Although the merchants of the Yun Nation could only get 30%, they could use this opportunity to gain the backing of the big shots in the court, which was exactly what they wanted. After abandoning these industries that didn't have much technical content, Rinpoche finally had more manpower. The big shots in the court were very grateful to Rinpoche as they could earn a large sum of money just by sitting at home. As for the people of the Yun Nation, not only did they get new technology but they also found a big backer. It could be said that everyone was happy. The most important point was that this method directly narrowed the distance between the Yun Nation and the Aboriginals. The big merchants and families of the Yun Nation were entangled with the Aboriginals, so both sides were naturally much closer. The attitude of the upper class also affected the ordinary people of the lower class. As a result, the Yun Nation was much more stable. If anyone wanted to rebel, these merchants who were involved would be the first to tell on them. Of course, it wasn't that there weren't any disadvantages. It could be said that Rinpoche directly exposed the collusion between the officials and the merchants in Dayo, which was still justifiable. He had directly planted a flower of darkness on this plain and unadorned land. However, this was also done after weighing all aspects. After the people were enlightened, he would rectify this situation. Moreover, the rearguard commandery would always keep an eye on those merchants. When a bad sign appeared, he would make a move on them, killing the chicken to warn the monkey. The others didn't know what he was planning. Even if they knew a little, they wouldn't be able to guess everything. However, the benefits were real and everyone could see them. One could imagine how the people of the Yun Nation felt about this Zhao Prince consort. Thanks to their publicity, Rinpoche was now really famous in the world. In turn, it actually affected the perception of many people in Lan City. Even outsiders were so respectful of him, not to mention that he had already done so many great things and brought about so many changes. As long as these people weren't pebbles, they would naturally change as well. As a result, many of the officials in Shanhui House were very respectful when they saw Rinpoche. It was completely different from a few years ago. Rinpoche didn't care about this change in attitude and didn't feel particularly good about it. On the one hand, he only had one person in his heart and didn't care about others. After all, he was already a few decades old. According to the age on Earth, he was now more than 50 years old. 10 years in Dayo was 30 years on Earth and he was 55 years old. According to the lifespan on Earth, it could be said that he had one foot in the grave and didn't care so much about other people's opinions. On the other hand, he was used to this attitude. Of course, who would dare to believe that he was 55 years old when he returned to Earth with his burly waist and ferocious face? 35 was more like it. Ren Wanyin didn't dare to walk with Rinpoche now. No matter how one looked at it, Rinpoche looked 20 years younger. Time hardly left any traces on his face. His hair and beard, which were easily eroded by time, didn't even leave a trace. First, set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile. Chapter 1007. When Ren Baqian entered Shanhui House, everyone subconsciously made way for him. "That was Yu Qing just now," Ren Baqian said bluntly. It was rare that he didn't call her Hua. Even without him saying it, everyone knew that it was the little princess. Ren Baqian smiled at everyone and said, "This child has been in the palace for a long time and always wants to see the outside world. She sneaked out today." Everyone thought of this as well. When they saw her, they knew that she was a child who sneaked out from a wealthy family. She didn't understand anything in this world and often had a blank expression on her face. She looked adorable and made people want to pinch her. Those who had this thought were glad that they didn't pinch her. They regretted it after thinking about it. If only they had pinched her, they would have something to brag about in the future. I also pinched the face of the current princess. After more than 100 years it would become, I also pinched the face of the current empress. Thinking about it, it would be so cool to say it. Those people regretted it even more when they thought about it. Seeing that all of you like her, I'm very happy as a father. After all, she is my daughter. Ren Baqian laughed. Everyone laughed as well. However, the next time you see her, you still have to report to the palace early. You know the importance of her identity, Ren Baqian added. Don't worry, Zhao Prince Consort. If anyone wants to hurt the little princess, they have to do it over our dead bodies first. Someone immediately said, "That's right. Never let anyone hurt the little princess." Everyone agreed. It's not just because of this. Her Majesty will also be worried if she finds out that she sneaked out of the palace, Ren Baqian continued. In fact, he wasn't very worried about Hua's safety in Lan City. In any case, she was their child. Understood. Hearing that Her Majesty was mentioned, everyone looked solemn and said, "If you see the little princess sneaking out again, you must report to the palace." Ren Baqian nodded, picked up the wine jar and bowl that Qi Yuqing had drunk from, and poured himself a cup. "Today is a good day and I'll drink with all of you." After saying that, he downed the cup. When the wine entered his stomach, Ren Baqian understood that it was about 23 to 24 degrees. Following which, Ren Baqian smiled at everyone and said, "Today's wine is on my daughter. I won't be paying for it." Everyone immediately scratched their heads and laughed. "Zhao Prince Consort, what are you talking about?" Ren Baqian nodded at everyone before leaving. He was really happy, which was why he said so much. As for the reason, it was simple. It was obvious that these people liked two flowers very much. This is the joy of being a father. These people were the descendants of officials, and in the future they would also become officials in the imperial court. This scene made him feel that when Hua grew up, he could also become an emperor who was as prestigious as the empress and loved by the officials and people. When he came here, he was prepared for a mixed doubles match. However, after seeing the scene in Shanhui House, the anger in Ren Baqian's heart disappeared without a trace, and he changed his mind. Even though he had changed his mind, the empress hadn't. Ren Baqian was still at the palace gate when he heard a cry coming from inside. Doubtlessly, Honeysuckle was beaten up again. Upon entering the palace, he saw the palace guards standing there obediently, not even daring to breathe loudly. The fury of the empress made them feel pressured. Ren Baqian smiled and paced around the palace slowly. He wasn't in a hurry to go back and see his daughter get beaten up. After a while, when Hua's crying and laughter stopped, Ren Baqian went back. He saw the empress sitting there with a cold expression. He couldn't see any anger, but it was still very cold. Hua was sitting on a small stool with a small table in front of her. She was obediently copying the three-character classic. Ren Baqian looked at Hua's movements and knew that she was suspended in the air. He reckoned that her butt was swollen from being beaten by the empress and didn't dare to sit. Xianzhe will be back in 2 days. At that time, it won't be easy for her to escape. Ren Baqian smiled at the empress. Xianzhe. The empress relaxed a little when she heard this name. It had been 3 years. Back then, the empress had sent her and Lin Xiaola to the mines in a fit of anger. It was about time for them to return. The empress always felt that Xianzhe was more trustworthy. Just like Qing Yuan and Hong Luan, who were lively and clever back then, they were now 30 years old. However, the empress was still reluctant to let them out of the palace. As for the two of them, they were used to staying in the palace and had no intention of going out. "Has your Majesty regretted letting her out for so many years?" Ren Baqian asked with a smile as he sat opposite the empress. The empress rolled her eyes at him. Whose fault was this? She said, "Meritorious service should be rewarded, and mistakes should be punished." Hua, who was at the side, pricked up her ears and listened to the conversation between her father and mother. Who was Xianzhe? She stopped what she was doing. The Empress glanced at her and Hua shivered. She pouted her lips and continued copying the three-character classic with a look of deep hatred. She hated the person who wrote this book to the core. 2 days later, 2 women sat on jumping sheep and entered the city under the protection of a group of guards. One of them was wearing shabby clothes, a pair of glasses, and her hair was tied up simply at the back of her head. She looked around curiously. It had changed. It was very different from before she left. Apart from the tractor she saw on the road, Lan City had also changed a lot. The most obvious change was that it was livelier. The shops on both sides of Jianghu Street that were originally closed were now open. From time to time, people from the Yun Nation and the Jing tribe could be seen greeting customers in the shops. There were fewer people fighting. Both sides of the road were crowded with pedestrians, and one would bump into someone every few steps. Originally, there should have been a fight, but she didn't see any fighting after walking for so long. As she walked, a sweet fragrance wafted into her nose. Lin Xiaola, who was originally drowsy on her mount, suddenly had her ears pricked up. She even trembled and saliva dripped down her face. Following the smell, she saw that it was the imperial pastries. When Zhao Prince Consort came last year, he said that the imperial pastries were opened in the city and that Lin Xiaola would definitely like this place. A gust of wind blew past Xinjia, and Lin Xiaola was nowhere to be seen. A moment later, Lin Xiaola came out of the imperial pastries with a handful of sweets in her arms. Xinjia frowned. Actually, she didn't like Lin Xiaola very much as she was too lazy. Furthermore, she was robbing the imperial shop. Did she want to go to the mines and bask in the sun for a few more years? Before she could finish her thoughts, a lady in white rushed out of the imperial pastries. She was about 17 or 18 years old and extremely beautiful. Coupled with her white wide-sleeved robe, she looked like a fairy from a painting. However, at this moment, she had a murderous look on her face. Lin Xiaola. You actually came back and even dared to snatch my sweets. Lin Xiaola didn't pay attention to her at all. In a flash, she jumped onto the roof and dashed toward the imperial palace. Bastard! I'm not done with you. The young lady was furious, but she couldn't catch up with Lin Xiaola. She could only stand on the roof and watch Lin Xiaola's disappearing figure. She clenched her teeth and swore that she would definitely take revenge. Xinjia recognized the young lady the moment she came out. She was Tong Lan. She also frequently entered the imperial palace. Although she had grown up quite a bit, her features were still there. When she saw the imperial palace in front of her, Xinjia felt refreshed. She was finally back. Lin Xiaola was squatting in front of the imperial palace. Her cheeks were still bulging and Xinjia didn't know how much sweets she had stuffed in. Commander, you're back. The imperial guards shouted when they saw Xinjia. I'm not the commander. Xinjia waved her hand. She was still a nobody. Commander, you might not know this, but Commander Jiang has been promoted and transferred to the Protectorate of the South, a guard immediately said with a smile. Commander Jiang was Jiang Ningyun, the champion of the lantern-grabbing contest back then and the commander of the Imperial Guards for the past 3 years. Before Xinjia returned, Jiang Ningyun had been promoted and transferred to the Protectorate of the South. The significance of this was self-evident. Her Majesty's trust in Commander has not decreased at all, another guard said. When Xinjia heard this, her eyebrows twitched slightly, and a warm feeling flowed through her heart. She would be able to see Her Majesty and Zhao Prince Consort soon. She wondered what the child of Her Majesty and Zhao Prince Consort would be like. Xinjia's expression was still cold, but her heart was very warm. Chapter 1008. Xinjia Lin Xiaola received the decree. As soon as Xinjia and Lin Xiaola entered the palace, they were stopped by a group of guards. Apart from the leader, there was another person behind him carrying a tray. Xinjia was stunned. She cupped her hands respectfully and said, Xinjia accepts the decree. Her Majesty has decreed that Xinjia will be reinstated as the commander of the Imperial Palace Guards and Lin Xiaola will be reinstated as the librarian of Qingxin Palace Hall. The two of them will take up their posts immediately. The Imperial Guard cupped his hands at the two of them and said, Congratulations, Commander and Librarian Lin. His Majesty wants the two of you to take a bath and change your clothes before having an audience with him. Yes. Xinjia replied. He lowered his head and looked at his shabby clothes. It was indeed not suitable for him to meet His Majesty. It seemed that His Majesty had already thought of this. Xinjia's armor, the token from the palace, and Lin Xiaola's clothes were on the tray. The commander's residence in the palace is still there. Nothing has changed, the guard said. Reporting to your majesty, Xinjia will have an audience with the emperor after bathing and changing her clothes. Xinjia cupped her hands in greeting and took the tray. With the imperial edict and token, she could be considered to have been reinstated. After that, Xinjia didn't need anyone to lead her. She was familiar with the palace, so she carried the token back to her residence in the palace. Along the way, all the guards she met bowed respectfully to her. Although Xinjia had just returned, she was still their leader in their hearts. When he returned to his courtyard, it was clean. It seemed that someone had just cleaned it. Xinjia went to the courtyard to fetch water for a bath. She had never relied on others to do these things before. After taking a bath and changing her clothes, Xinjia carefully caressed the familiar armor before putting it on again. He walked out of the courtyard and called for a guard. "Where's Librarian Lin?" As soon as she asked the question, she knew that there was no need to ask any more. He went straight to Qingxin Palace Hall. Sure enough, Lin Xiaola was lying face down in the courtyard with the tray thrown aside. Only the candy that she snatched from Tong Lan was still tightly clenched in her hand. Xinjia didn't hold back and kicked him. The hairs on Lin Xiaola's body stood on end. She jumped up and struck with her claw. This move wasn't very effective against Renbaqian, so it was even more useless against Xinjia. "Put on your clothes and follow me to see Her Majesty," Xinjia said coldly. Only then did Lin Xiaola remember that she still had something to do. He changed into his clothes in the yard, yawned and said, "Let's go." The eerie old woman sitting on the second floor of Qingxin Palace twitched her ears and cursed. This girl has forgotten who picked her up. Although Supervisor Lin's feelings for Lin Xiaola were like that of a kitten or puppy, but she didn't expect that the lass would fall asleep in the courtyard when she came back, and then she went to see His Majesty, completely forgetting about her. For a moment, he felt that he had raised an ingrate all these years. The two of them headed to the Azure Cloud Palace, which was the current location of the Empress. Originally, the Emperor's sleeping quarters were located in the center of the palace. After it collapsed, they moved to the west side, and when the west side collapsed, they moved to the east side. Over the past few years, the interior of the palace had been demolished and rebuilt, and Renbaqian and the Empress could be considered to be living in less than half of the palace. Counting the number of palaces that the Hao nation's emperors had lived in for more than a dozen generations, the total number of palaces that they had lived in was probably less than that of 2 emperors. Now, the entire palace was waiting for the new palace to be built so that they wouldn't have to go through any more trouble. As for the instigator of all this, the roaring emperor was still diligently digging holes in the ground while no one was looking. The cobweb-like passageways under the palace that Honeysuckle had walked through were his masterpieces. Now, that place had become a place for Honeysuckle to explore, and he was always able to find something that tasted good. When they arrived outside the Azure Cloud Palace, the two of them heard a series of children cheering. They looked in the direction of the sound and saw a 7- or 8-year-old child jumping up and down along the trees in the courtyard. In a short while, the child jumped in front of the two of them and looked at them curiously. Looking at the pair of phoenix eyes that were exactly the same as the Empress's, the two of them knew who this child was. Xinjia also squeezed out a smile and said, "Princess. Who are you?" Honeysuckle looked up at Xinjia curiously, sniffed, and his attention was quickly attracted by something else. She moved her feet and appeared in front of Lin Xiaola. She circled around her and reached for the bag of sweets on Lin Xiaola's waist. This bag was given to her by Renbaqian, and it just so happened to contain the sweets that she had snatched from Tong Lan. Smack. Honeysuckle stared at the bag at Lin Xiaola's waist and felt a pain in his hand. Lin Xiaola's ears trembled and she bared her canine teeth. "It's mine." Honeysuckle was stunned. After being in the palace for so long, this was the first time that someone actually hit her without giving her anything. For a moment she forgot to cry. "This is the princess." Xinjia's face turned cold and she really wanted to give her a kick. "I'm also a secretary," Lin Xiaola said disapprovingly. "I've always been the one robbing others. When has anyone ever robbed me?" Xinjia's expression changed. "The princess is still a child." Lin Xiaola rolled her eyes, covered the bag of sweets with one hand and said, "Who isn't a child? She wasn't even an adult yet." Xinjia almost choked to death. If Her Majesty wasn't inside, she would have had a fight with her first. She glared at Xinjia and went to see Her Majesty first before finding an opportunity to keep an eye on her. Xinjia had known for a long time that Lin Xiaola was a secretary in Qingxin Palace Hall, but the two of them had never interacted much. After going to the mines for 3 years, Xinjia finally knew what kind of person Lin Xiaola was. Her impression of Lin Xiaola had long since dropped to the freezing point. Zhao Prince Consort could tolerate her, but Xanzhi couldn't, given her rigid character. Honeysuckle finally came to her senses. She pouted and wanted to cry, but she was afraid that her father would hear her and scold her again. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked around. With a slight movement, she arrived at the flower bed. She reached down with her small hands and pulled out a finger-long earth dragon from the soil. Swap. Honeysuckle stretched out her hand and looked at Lin Xiaola expectantly. No. Lin Xiaola covered the bag of sweets. She wasn't interested in insects. More tears welled up in Honeysuckle's eyes. She jumped onto the tree and grabbed a one-horned beetle. She raised her little hand in front of Lin Xiaola and said, "Swap." No. Xanzhi's face started to turn ashen. Even if she had to risk being punished by Her Majesty, she had to teach this unruly person a lesson. Honeysuckle's eyes were red and her nose was sniffling. She looked like she was about to cry. After thinking for a long time, she climbed up the tree and took down something the size of an adult's palm. Xanzhi's mouth twitched. She could clearly see that it was a skinned and dried rat. Many aborigines ate this kind of thing, but who would dare to let this little princess eat it? Swap. Honeysuckle looked at Lin Xiaola stubbornly. Sure. Lin Xiaola beamed with joy the moment she saw the thing. She carefully took out a piece of candy from the bag of sweets and stuffed it into Honeysuckle's hand. Then she snatched the dried rat from her hand and hung it on her waist. "We're even," Lin Xiaola said with a smile. Honeysuckle looked at the nail-sized piece of candy in her hand. She didn't feel that it was a loss to exchange such a big dried rat for it. She directly threw the candy into her mouth and squinted her eyes. She knew the meaning of happiness just by looking at her face. "Her Majesty wants both of you to have an audience." At this moment, the guard's voice sounded. Xanzhi glared at Lin Xiaola unwillingly before turning around and walking in silently. Please remember the domain name of this book. Com. Wonderful Book House mobile version website. Com. In fact, when the Empress was young, Lin Xiaola was already about the same age as she was now. When the Empress first saw her, she felt that she was like an elder sister. Of course, this feeling didn't last long. It lasted for about a day. When the two left, they saw two flowers again. Next to Hua was a young woman in a silk dress who didn't look gentle at all. She held a fruit in one hand and placed it next to Hua's mouth with the other. "Your Highness, I am Xanzhi. From today onwards, I will be the commander of the palace guards." Xanzhi greeted the two flowers. Honeysuckle thought for a moment. "Oh." He continued to nibble on the fruit. Xanzhi smiled, bowed to two flowers and then left. As for Lin Xiaola, she yawned and swayed her feet as she followed. Before he could walk 100 meters, Xanzhi kicked him without any warning. Lin Xiaola was startled, jumped up a tree and asked, "What are you doing?" "If you are so rude again, I will definitely teach you etiquette," Xanzhi said with a cold face. "As if you know etiquette. Tell me, what does etiquette in the palace include?" "I don't owe you money." Lin Xiaola snorted. Don't forget that she was a scholar of Qingxin Palace Hall. Even though she slept for a living, she would occasionally read a few books when she was awake. Xanzhi was stunned and stumped by Lin Xiaola's question. She stood there and pondered for a while before turning around and leaving. That night, Rinpochen was stunned when he heard Xanzhi's request. Xanzhi wanted to learn etiquette from the palace? In his impression, Xanzhi was a woman who didn't know anything other than practicing martial arts and doing her job. Today she was actually enlightened and wanted to learn etiquette from the palace? What kind of stimulation was this? However, this was a small matter. He immediately agreed and informed the female official. The female official in charge of etiquette in the palace was probably so bored that she was going to rot. Xanzhi sulked. From the next day onward, she would spend an hour learning etiquette every day. "I'm finally going to graduate." Du Laolu showed an exaggerated expression. 7 years, 7 years. What have I been doing for the past 6 years? Algebra, geometry, physics, and chemistry, I'm going crazy. I really don't know how I managed to endure it. If it weren't for my father's disapproval, I would have graduated 3 years ago and lived a good life. Su Peng said angrily. These days, the highest-ranking students in the academy began to get excited. After enduring for 7 years, they could finally graduate. Everyone was excited as if they were about to start a new life. They could finally say goodbye to Yagüe. They could finally say goodbye to those damn classes. They could finally stop doing homework. The students who were about to leave the abyss of misery began to become bolder and would hang around Rinpochen from time to time. They only wanted to express one thing: bite me. In any case, they would graduate in half a month. Tong Lan, who was wearing a white coat, sat there and proofread the drawings in her hands. Without looking up, she said, "Isn't it too early for all of you to be happy? We haven't even graduated yet." "It's not early anymore. There are only 10 more days." Du Laolu stretched out his hand and gestured 10. "Don't be too ostentatious. Be careful that extreme joy begets sorrow. For example, you can only graduate if you pass the exam." Shurgan smiled at everyone. Shurgan, who was originally delicate and pretty, had now become burly and had a full beard. It looked like his brain was full of muscles. However, all the students knew that Shurgan had the best overall qualities among this batch of students. Whether it was his academic results, ability to handle affairs, or even dealing with people, Shurgan was extremely good at them. If anyone thought that he was as straightforward as he looked, they wouldn't even know that they were tricked by him. "It's just an exam." Du Laolu laughed and said confidently, "At most, we can take a makeup exam. We will pass after a few more times." Many students gave him the middle finger. This was what they learned from the manga. Seeing how confident he was, they thought that he was confident about the exam, but it turned out that he was confident about the makeup exam. While everyone was chatting and laughing, Renbachien came to the door, saw the lively classroom, and knocked on the door with a strange smile. "Yagui is here." Everyone immediately sat back in their seats. Although he was about to graduate, Renbachien's prestige was still there. "We will graduate in 10 days. Does anyone have any thoughts?" Renbachien walked to the podium and smiled. "We can't bear to part with Principal Ren." Someone blurted out. Everyone immediately looked strange. Couldn't bear to part with Yagui? They wished they could never see him again in this life. "I can't bear to part with all of you either." Renbachien acted as if he didn't see the strange expressions on everyone's faces. Everyone's hearts tightened. Yagui wouldn't be up to something, right? However, all good things must come to an end. Renbachien smiled at everyone. Everyone finally felt a little relieved, and a relaxed smile appeared on their faces once again. "However, before you graduate, I have something to inform all of you." Renbachien's eyes were smiling. He had been watching the excitement of these students for the past few days. However, in order not to disturb their excitement, there was something that he hadn't told them. It was time to tell them now. "Please speak, Principal Ren." Everyone looked relaxed. It didn't matter what the notice was. After all, there were only 10 days left. Everyone could finally escape from the abyss of suffering. "First of all, congratulations to all of you for graduating from Black Bamboo Academy's high school. You can be said to be the first batch of highly educated people in Daeyo," Renbachien said. Everyone nodded their heads. They were still confident about this. Although 7 years was tough, they did learn a lot. They were still very grateful to Renbachien for this. "Next, I will announce one more thing." Renbachien looked at everyone. "In 10 days, Black Bamboo Academy." Renbachien kept them guessing, paused for a moment, and then said with a smile, "We will establish a university department." Everyone was shocked. "What?" "Congratulations to all of you for bidding farewell to high school and starting a brand new, university life." Renbachien was pleased to see that everyone's expressions froze. This included Tong Lan and Shurgan. Everyone widened their eyes and looked at Renbachien. "Principal." "What?" "Under normal circumstances, you will spend 3 years in middle school, 3 years in high school, and university will be missing. 4 years later, you will truly become the top talents of Daeyo." Everyone's expression changed drastically as they exclaimed, "University? There are still 4 years left?" Everyone who was originally excited about graduating felt as if they had been struck by lightning. All of them were crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. These 3 years in high school were already countless times more difficult than middle school. They had suffered countless beatings and punishments before they could finally graduate. But now Yagui was telling them that there was still university? There were still 4 years left? Even in the hot Daeyo, everyone felt as if they had been splashed with a basin of ice water from head to toe. Of course, you can also enter the various departments after graduating from high school. You'd better go back and discuss this with your families. Of course, I will also listen to your family's opinions. Renbachien smiled amiably. Drop out of high school and enter the various departments? Even if they were willing, would their families be willing? Graduation? Do you think you can graduate? Do you think you can graduate in 4 years? Looking at their expressions, Renbachien was very happy. He had endured for so long just to tell them this touching news today. Well, I should be able to play around again in 4 years. Let me tell you that there is an advanced profession called masters. There is also an advanced profession called doctors. After that, there is an advanced profession called Saint Seiya. Alright, school is over. Ren Baqin strolled out of the door, leaving behind a group of completely petrified students. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 10:10. That day after school, the students of this year's batch were all pale, their eyes lifeless as they floated out. After 6 years of suffering, they thought that they could finally see the light, but they found that they were greeted by an even deeper darkness. Thinking about the next 4 years, everyone wanted to cry but had no tears. The students of the other batches were puzzled at first. These seniors had been in high spirits recently, so why did they suddenly look like they were living a life worse than death? When they found out about the situation, all of their faces turned pale. The future of these seniors was also their future. Some people were living a life worse than death, and naturally some people were happy. For example, Zhang Kaixian really liked this place. With the teachers around, the students were also interesting, could learn all kinds of interesting things, and could even go to the library to read interesting comics. She didn't like to work in any department, and her family wasn't short of money. It couldn't be better for her to continue studying in this school. 10 days later, the first batch of students graduated again. However, this time the graduation party was much simpler. This time, all the students from ordinary families except for one person chose to graduate. After all, for them and their families, this level of learning was enough. Another 4 years of learning was too much for them. After all, the family situation of ordinary people couldn't support them to continue studying like this. They didn't want it to be like this. Dayo was currently undergoing changes. Lan City and Dayo were different every month. When they were at the school, they often wanted to participate in the changes as they watched from the sidelines. Therefore, they chose to graduate and work in the 6 departments. Ren Baqin understood this very well. As for the descendants of the influential families, none of the successful ones graduated. All of them entered university. Amidst the wailing, the first thing that greeted them was the entrance exam in a month's time. At this time, in the imperial court, a group of people had their eyes on a small table in the center. On the table was a black box with a disc with numbers from 0 to 9 written on it. There was also a wire on the box that connected it to the outside of the hall. Ren Baqin held the microphone on the box with one hand and rotated the disc with the other. After a while, a beeping sound came from the microphone. After only one ring, the other end was picked up. "Your Highness. We succeeded." Ren Baqin looked at everyone and smiled. Before anyone could react, the person on the other end of the phone cheered. Ren Baqin said a few words of encouragement to the other end of the phone before hanging up and looking at everyone in the hall with a smile. "Your Highness, isn't this the same as the radio station from before?" Shi Qing asked. Although Ren Baqin didn't explain, they had already guessed the purpose of this box. No, a radio station is a radio station. The radio station is where we talk to each other in different channels. It is a fixed-frequency communication. There were a few disadvantages. First, the number of fixed frequencies was limited, and the radio station could not be used by everyone. Secondly, if someone else got their hands on the radio, they would be able to hear the conversation on the channel. Although this had not happened before, it did not mean that it would not happen in the future. Thirdly, the radio station's ability to resist interference is weak. For example, radio stations can't be used in Tianjin Basin. They didn't understand the technology and didn't understand the meaning behind his words. However, from Ren Baqin's words, he could tell that this box was something better than a radio station. "Introduce them to me," the Empress said faintly from her seat of honor. "Yes." He smiled at the Empress. Then he turned around and said, "This is a telephone which is used for long-distance communication like a radio station. There is no need to elaborate on the other 2 points. First, this is point-to-point communication. A telephone only needs to dial the corresponding number to communicate with any other telephone. For example, this telephone can communicate point-to-point with any department in the 6 departments or any department in any city at any time. Everything that is said can only be heard by the person at the other end of the line." Everyone nodded. This time they understood. The radio station was for everyone to chat together, but this telephone was for 2 people to chat privately. Second, and most importantly, the popularity of the telephone. Telephones can be installed in any place in Dayo, and there can be millions or even tens of millions of telephones. Whether it is in every department, every city, or even every household. Everyone could use a phone to dial the corresponding number to talk to one of the millions of phones out there. For example, Sir Sher can install such a telephone in his residence. As long as I have the corresponding number of Sir Sher's home telephone, I can call his residence from any place at any time and talk to him through any telephone. For example, all of you can contact him through the telephone in any corner of Lan City or Dayo. Even if you are in the 60,000 mountains, you can contact him through the telephone. After Rinpoche finished speaking, he smiled and looked at everyone. He had to wait for them to react. Although they had seen enough new things over the years, they still needed some time to digest Rinpoche's words. On Earth, the early application of the telephone was the magnet telephone, which was the kind in movies that generated electricity by hand while making a call. After that, the operator would transfer the call. After that, there was the common battery telephone, which no longer needed to generate electricity by hand. However, it still needed the operator of the telephone exchange to transfer the call manually. This kind of telephone needed to be transferred manually, so there weren't many numbers. Naturally, there weren't many users. At that time, the largest telephone exchange in Asia, Shanghai, had only a few thousand users. The biggest limitation of the telephone wasn't the technology of the telephone, but the technology of the telephone interaction. The first two types were manually connected. After that, there was the step-by-step switchboard, which allowed the telephone to be connected mechanically. However, there were also many shortcomings, especially the high power consumption and the difficulty of maintenance. Knowing that this kind of thing would enter millions of households sooner or later, Rinpoche naturally eliminated it. What he used was the more mature vertical and horizontal switchboard technology. In the 50s and 60s on Earth, the use of this kind of switchboard had become mainstream. In China it was used until the 80s and 90s. Of course, this was also a technology that would be eliminated sooner or later. However, the next generation of technology required electronic technology. Rinpoche waited for a long time before the faces of everyone gradually began to change. Your Highness, do you mean that this thing can be installed in our residences? Not only in your residences, but also in everyone's homes, including those villages in the mountains. Rinpoche corrected. Of course, this was on the premise that those birds that had nothing better to do and played with wires had to be driven away. The cities were fine, but there were many beasts in the wilderness that liked to pull wires or dig holes. Everyone suddenly exclaimed. Installed such a phone in everyone's home? Please remember the domain name of this book. Com. Wonderful Book House mobile version. Com. Chapter 10-11. For the time being, it wasn't realistic to install telephones in thousands of households. Apart from that, the installation fee alone wasn't affordable for ordinary people, not to mention the monthly rent and communication fees. The installation fee was 50 taels of silver, and the monthly rent was 1 tael of silver. The phone bill was 60 copper coins per 5 minutes, and it was counted as 5 minutes if it was less than 5 minutes. Rinpoche knew that this was the trend, and the future wasn't far away. It would be 20 to 30 years at most. However, for the time being, the main targets of telephones were the court and merchants. At the same time, there was also public telephones. Rinpoche was going to install public telephones throughout Dayo, including the Yun Nation and Tianjin Basin, and use them to collect copper coins. As for the cables needed to lay telephone lines, Rinpoche had made a lot of preparations for this. As early as a year ago, Rinpoche introduced a new coin, a copper-clad steel alloy coin with a face value equivalent to 5 copper coins. Although countless steel rails were used to lay the railways, the price of steel was even higher than that of copper among the people. In addition, a new decree was issued that no one could refuse to accept the new coin, and those who were reported would be fined or whipped. Therefore, after a little chaos, this exquisite new coin was introduced. Taking this opportunity, Rinpoche collected a large number of copper coins from the market and smelted them into cables. However, there were still a large number of copper coins circulating in the market, and the price of copper coins even rose as he collected a large number of copper coins. Next, Rinpoche was going to use the coin-operated telephone to exchange the copper coins on the market for aluminum-magnesium alloy coins and completely replace the old coins with new coins. There was no other way. Compared to the lack of iron, there was a lack of copper. At present, the two largest copper mines were in Great Xia, and they were in the north. Rinpoche wasn't interested in Great Xia, and the location of those two mines determined that Dayo couldn't send troops to directly occupy them. As for the copper mines in the Yun Nation, the output was still insufficient for Rinpoche's needs, and the cables were currently the largest copper consumer. Rinpoche could only temporarily set his sights on the copper coins in the market to solve this urgent problem. After demonstrating the telephone to many officials in court, Rinpoche first gave each official a telephone in their residence, including the installation. Of course, they still had to pay the monthly rent and communication fees themselves. After that, under the Empress's instructions, the Ministry of Revenue directly ordered 1,000 telephones from Rinpoche's Royal Communications Company. With the exception of the Yun Nation, all the cities and most of the important departments in the entire Dayo region had telephones. Taking advantage of the Empress's order, Rinpoche ordered that every department in every city had to install a telephone. In reality, it was not a lot of money. In total, there were only about 3,000 telephones and a few 100,000 taels of silver. But he pushed the phone directly to the world. With this incident, Rinpoche felt that he and the Empress were the greatest examples of collusion between officials and businessmen. Of course, as soon as the order was given, apart from Tuwan from the Ministry of Revenue, there was no response from the Yun Nation. However, no one would disrespect the Empress on this matter. Moreover, the importance of the telephone was unparalleled. Its importance and significance were no less than that of the tractor. In fact, they were even greater. Rinpoche had officially opened the door to the communication era. After the demonstration in the imperial court, Rinpoche got people to lay a telephone line from Lan City to the Yun Nation while he started to promote the project. At the same time, the recruits from Tianjin Basin were also undergoing intensive training. After recruiting a large number of laborers from Tianjin Basin to build the new city, Rinpoche finally began to make use of Tianjin Basin's manpower on a large scale. Between Lan City and Tianjin Basin, Rinpoche also built a new city. The so-called new city was nothing more than a stretch of brick houses and factories without even a fence. Of course, this was also the standard for future cities. Without walls, not only would it save a lot of manpower and material resources, but it would also facilitate expansion. At present, this new city was mainly responsible for the production of telephones and electric wires. Rubber was sent here from the Qin Nation, which saved about 700 to 800 kilometers compared to sending it to Lan City. Furthermore, Rinpoche was already preparing to build a new factory near the Protectorate of the Southeast that would be responsible for processing rubber. The mist is heavy today and the country is deep here. The sound of the beach is more urgent than the autumn, and the air of the gorge is more cloudy. Looking at the watchtower, the clouds cover the eyes, and the heart is homesick with raindrops. How can I comfort my loneliness? I depend on the zither of the north. Overflowing with emotion, touching the heart, the sentences are neat and natural. I don't know who wrote this poem, but it's worthy of the name of a famous person. In a restaurant, a few scholars sat around a table, and one of them clapped his hands and praised. It's really not bad. It should be written by Zhao Prince Consort. He's not an aboriginal, so it's not surprising that he could write such a poem in a foreign land. He has a beauty in his arms and great power. I'm afraid he's enjoying it. Someone chuckled. A beauty in his arms? That's not necessarily the case. How could Her Majesty be a warm, fragrant and soft jade? Someone looked around and chuckled. It's better not to talk about these things, an old man said while paying attention to his surroundings. If others heard about the emperor in private, they would immediately be in big trouble. I've long heard that Zhao Prince Consort is proficient in miscellaneous arts, but I didn't expect him to be proficient in poetry. The way of poetry only cultivates one's temperament and isn't beneficial to governing the country. Someone shook his head. What do you think about that telephone? Everyone was discussing a poem that had been circulating in the city recently. There was another sentence at the end of the poem. Homesickness? Make a call home. One poem, one sentence had brought this new thing, the telephone, directly to the front of everyone. This poem and this sentence were printed on a piece of paper with a picture of a telephone at the bottom. On the back of the paper was a brief introduction of the telephone, as well as the locations of the Royal Telephone Service offices in the various cities of the Yun Nation. As soon as this advertising flyer appeared, it immediately caused an uproar in the entire Yun Nation. It's really incredible to be able to use this to communicate from thousands of miles away. I wonder if it's true. Someone said. It can't be false. This matter has already spread throughout the Yun Nation. If it's false, then it will become a laughing stock. How could Zhao Prince Consort be so unwise? I heard that the city commander's residence has already ordered the installation of the telephone. Based on the time, it will be installed in 5 to 7 days. We will know the specifics when the time comes. If it's really as described on that piece of paper, this telephone is really amazing. In the future, no matter what happens anywhere, Lan City will immediately know and orders will be issued. It's scary just thinking about it. You guys don't know, a young man said in a low voice. Do you think this kind of thing only exists? In fact, it has existed for a long time. I heard from my uncle that the city commander once went to the Protectorate of the Northeast for an urgent matter and received a reply within 15 minutes. A few days later, the city commander received the same decree. Even if we don't talk about this, you guys can study the movements of the troops from the Protectorate of the Northeast during the war a few years ago. Stop talking. Someone stopped him. It's useless to talk about this matter. It's not our place to discuss it. Be careful not to invite trouble. Brother Zhu, you're too careful. This matter can be detected as long as someone has the intention. Do you think you can stop the world from talking about it? The scholar said disapprovingly. However, this telephone is also good for us. In the future, if we go out to travel, it's very convenient to call home and ask about the recent situation. That's true. Traveling is just to increase one's knowledge. In the end, it still has to be sold to the imperial family. Now that the Yun nation is gone and the examination is also gone, I don't know where we can go. Someone sighed. As soon as this was said, everyone immediately quieted down. Chapter 10-12. The Yun nation had been gone for 6 years. In the past 6 years, these scholars had been greatly affected. It could be said that his entire fate had changed. They learned the arts and sold them to the emperor's family, but where were they selling them to now? Until now, no one from the Yun nation had become an official in the imperial court of Dayo, and there was no such thing as a major examination in Dayo. It could be said that their path had been blocked. It was also because of this that there were so many scholars who lingered in the brothels, leading a befuddled life. Some of those who were born in large clans were either looking for a way out in the current city magistrates' mansions, or continuing their studies. Those whose family conditions were not good in the first place would simply become a shopkeeper for a merchant or go farming. Originally, the scholars still had some allowances from the imperial court, but now they could only make a living on their own. Although the people present were all of good backgrounds, when they thought of the current situation of those commoner scholars, they all felt sad. As for his own future, he had no idea what it would be like. It's a pity that the royal family of the Xia dynasty is in decline. Otherwise, we could go to the Xia dynasty to find a way out. Someone sighed. Even though they didn't want to leave their homes if there was really no way out, Great Xia was also a place to go. Furthermore, the Yun nation originated from Great Xia. It wasn't that the people of the Yun nation couldn't accept returning to Great Xia. Unfortunately, the Great Xia dynasty was still at war, and the Great Xia dynasty was still in a weak position. Ever since the rebel army had food, they immediately won over the hearts of the people. It was said that in the territory occupied by the rebels, no one died of starvation. Just this alone was enough to tempt many commoners. The rebel army had food, but the imperial court did not. After a few years, the rebels had already occupied 2/3 of the territory, and the imperial court of the Great Xia dynasty was declining. Perhaps in a few years, even the imperial court of the Great Xia dynasty would no longer exist. Under such circumstances, how would the scholars of the Yun nation be willing to go to Great Xia? It could be said that even their last path had been cut off. A few years ago, the Yun nation was prosperous and Great Xia was at its peak. Emperor Xia Bailong was bent on getting rid of Dayo. Who would have thought that a few years later, Xia Baichong would die, the Great Xia dynasty would be in danger, and the Yun nation would lose its country. Dayo, which used to be backward and barbaric, was now flourishing. At this moment, no one in Dayo's imperial court cared about what the scholars from the Yun nation thought. Everyone's attention was drawn to the recently installed telephone. Ever since this thing was installed, if there was anything else, they didn't even need to send anyone. They could just make a phone call. Only then did everyone understand how much of an impact this thing would have on the future. Tang Xinye watched as the installation was completed. Without waiting for them to test it, he grabbed them and dialed the palace's number. This is the royal family. Ma'am. A man's rough voice came from the other end of the line. The imperial family was different from other families. They had to report their names before they would be transferred to His Majesty or someone else. Otherwise, if others knew the number of the royal family and called them every day, who could stand it? I am Tang Xinye. Tang Xinye beamed with joy. He had already used this thing in the Ministry of Works, but it felt especially refreshing to install it in his own home. "Oh, it's Minister Tong. What's the matter?" "I'm just giving it a try." Tong Xingye chuckled and hung up the phone. The face of the operator on the other end of the line twitched. After hanging up the phone, Tong Xingye continued to call the Ministry of Works. Then he called Shiqing, Ko Zhihai, Tu Wan, and Zhuyan according to the paper pasted on the wall. Some of them got through, while others couldn't because the telephone hadn't been installed yet. After making one round of calls, Tong Xingye dialed Qin Chuan's number with a mischievous look on his face. The phone was picked up after ringing for a while. Qin Chuan's voice came from the other end of the line. This thing just rang. Did someone call?" "Idiot." Tong Xingye beamed with joy. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then Qin Chuan's thunderous roar could be heard. "Ignorant Tong, how dare you call me?" In fact, Tong Xingye could hear Qin Chuan's voice clearly even after he hung up the phone. Their mansions weren't far apart, and they were only separated by the residence of the Ministry of Rights Minister. "Idiot son, bite me?" Tong Xingye laughed heartily. "Ignorant old man, you are simply courting death. If I see you, I'll tear down that big dragon bone on your back and use it as a crutch." The big dragon bone referred to the spine, and the Aboriginals liked to call it the big dragon bone. "I didn't expect to hear your flustered and exasperated expression while I was drinking tea at home. Xinghong, give me some more tea." "Idiot, you can't see me, so what's the use of shouting?" Zhao Prince Consort has a good saying, "A dog that bites doesn't bark." "Ah. Just you wait, ignorant old man. I'm going to teach you a lesson today." Tong Xingye heard the sound of something smashing on the other end of the line. He wondered if that old man had smashed the phone. In less than 30 breaths, an angry roar came from the top of the Tong residence. "Ignorant old man, come out now. I'm going to tear your mouth apart today." Tong Xingye looked out and saw Qin Chuan standing on the roof with a knife looking for him. Needless to say, there was a routine fight. From that day onwards, Tong Xingye had another hobby. He would call Qin Chuan every night when he had nothing to do. The Xiong residence, which was situated between the Qin residence and the Tong residence, could be heard cursing at night from both sides. Even though they were using the phone, their cursing could be heard across half of Beihang district. Most of the cursing would end up in a brawl. After a few days, Xiong Yaohe cursed in court with dark circles under his eyes. In the end, the Empress gave both of them 50 strokes of the paddle each. She really gave both of them 50 strokes of the paddle, not one less. However, to the two of them, who had thick skin and flesh, 50 strokes of the paddle was no different from scratching an itch. The cursing continued every night. Then the cursing turned into a 3-person cursing. Now, it was the others who went to court with dark circles under their eyes. This farce continued until Tong Xingye and Qin Chuan were surrounded and beaten up by everyone. Before that, the Yun nation had also opened a phone line. In Luoya City, in addition to the warlord, all the officials were gathered around a table in the middle. "Is this the phone? It's such a big thing. What's this string for?" "It's said to transmit sound." "Can this string transmit sound all the way to Lan City?" "Won't we know after we try?" "Wait a while. The city guards have installed one too. Let's try it after it's done." "Send someone to ask if it's ready." "The city guards will need another day to install it. Why don't we try somewhere else?" "All right, shut up," the warlord said faintly. Then he took out a small book from his pocket, flipped through a few pages and turned the dial on the phone according to the numbers on it. Those with sharp eyes could see the words Dayo's address book written on it. After a while, a beeping sound came from the other end of the phone. The room immediately quieted down. Everyone pricked up their ears to see if this thing could really talk to people thousands of miles away. "Who is it?" When the other end of the phone was connected, everyone held their breath. The warlord was distracted for a moment, but the call was actually connected. Then he immediately said, "Is this the residence of Sanjiang City's mayor?" "This is the residence of Sanjiang City's mayor." "Who are you?" "I'm Su Ping from Luoya City. Is Brother Shin around?" "Warlord Su? I'm sorry. I'll inform the warlord right away." The person on the other end of the phone was surprised at first, then hurriedly replied. Currently there were 2 positions in the Yun nation, the warlord and the mayor. The group that had surrendered back then had all kept their positions as city lords. Those who were promoted later on were called the mayor. Although they had the same authority as the warlord, whether they could sit in this position depended on the imperial court. At this moment, everyone in the room was surprised. They actually fought their way to Sanjiang City. Hearing about it was one thing, but seeing it with their own eyes was another. With this thing, even if they were separated by 2 places, they could still contact each other at will. Many people were thinking that they should also install one at home. Although 50 taels of silver wasn't a small amount, it wasn't much to them. Su Ping chatted with the Sanjiang city's mayor for a while. Both of them found this kind of conversation thousands of miles away very refreshing. After a while, Su Ping put down the phone and sighed. Zhao Prince Consort is really a celestial being. Thank you to Rolling Round for the tip. Thank you to Ergowa for the tip. Genius 1 second to remember this website's address. Mobile version. Chapter 10:13. As the telephones were gradually installed in the residences of the warlords of the Yun nation, the originally vague veil over this new thing was finally lifted. There was no limit to the distance. They could talk at any time from hundreds of kilometers to thousands of kilometers away. They could clearly hear the other party's voice. The 2 warlords could even use it to chat about their daily lives. There was no need for the various departments to send people for anything. They only needed to make a phone call. Soon, everything about telephones swept through the entire Yin nation like a storm. Whether it was on the streets or in the alleys, in the brothels or restaurants, people were discussing telephones. Coupled with the advertisement, make a phone call if you miss home, it was in the limelight for a while. Rinpoche's reputation also rose, and the name Tiangong quickly replaced the original names Poison Warrior and Stinky King. Rinpoche was happy to see this because he finally didn't have to carry those 2 names on his back anymore. The name Poison Warrior was fine, but the name Stinky King would occasionally reach his ears through the rearguard commandery, making him feel inexplicably sad every time. It was as if he had become a stink bug crossing the street. What followed was a large number of orders from the people. In particular, the families and chambers of commerce didn't have a problem with the high installation cost and monthly rent of the telephones. The benefits of timely communication were innumerable. In just half a month, more than 40 royal communication stores throughout the Yun nation received more than 7,000 orders for the installation of telephones. A total of more than 40,000 telephones needed to be installed. On average, 6 telephones were installed for each order. Many chambers of commerce and families had installed one in each of the cities in their area of activity. This was 10 times the number of telephones installed in the Yun nation's imperial court and cities. This showed the affluence of the people of the Yun nation and their enthusiasm for telephones. With Rinpoche's current manpower, he could install more than 300 telephones a day. It would take more than 3 months to install more than 40,000 telephones. In addition to the installation of telephones in the southern cities of Dayo and Tianjin Basin, they would be fully booked for at least half a year. In addition to the public telephones that were expected to cover all of Dayo cities, it was estimated that it would take at least another year. A month later, Rinpoche received a special telephone installation request. Your Highness, you can't possibly refuse such a small request, right? Don't forget that we are still partners. Qing Lian looked at Rinpoche with a smile. Well, she had read the term partner from a book that Rinpoche gave her. You want me to lay telephone lines in Great Xia? Rinpoche smiled faintly and asked, Do you know how much it costs to lay these cables? Qing Lian smiled at him and slowly said, Your Highness, you call that a telephone cable, right? His Royal Highness used 20 pairs of telephone cables, which required 1 kilograms of copper per kilometer, which contained 51% copper. In other words, 1 kilometer required 7 kilograms of copper and 4 kilograms of insulating material. The distance from Iron Suo Pass to Little Jade Capital is 2,400 kilometers, and we need to go to Longchuan, Jiangyin, Qibei, Diyao, Shandong, Shenglong, Xingqing and Wu Road Pass. There are 8 routes, a total of 6,300 kilometers. Including the previous 2,400 kilometers, there was a total of 8,700 kilometers. Since the weight of a copper coin is 4 to 5 grams, we will count it as 5 grams. 1 tael of silver was equivalent to 1,200 copper, which was equivalent to 6 kilograms. I also roughly estimated the price of rubber. 1 kilogram wouldn't exceed 100 coppers, which is half the price of copper. Thus, excluding manpower, the cost of 1 kilometer was 2,180 copper coins. Based on the calculation of 2 taels of silver, the total cost would be 17,400 taels of silver. We can offer 200,000 taels of silver. Of course, I also know that this amount of silver isn't much to your highness, but Great Xia is vast and only you have the telephone technology. In the future, The entire Great Xia will have to rely on you in this aspect. These 8 routes are just the beginning, or it could be said that your highness did it out of convenience. However, his highness's convenience is of great use to us. All of us are extremely grateful to your highness. Rinpoche looked at Qing Lian's confident face and felt that it was a pity that such a talent was wasted on fighting and killing. Scientific research should be her home. The Sea of Stars should be her goal. You should continue to study at the academy. Are those sword masters doing well here with your highness? Qing Lian asked with a smile. After this is over, I might have to join them and seek shelter under your highness. I do owe you a favor for this. I can't forget, so you don't have to remind me. Rinpoche knocked on the table. It's not that I can't agree to this. Rinpoche thought about whether he should take this opportunity to get them to give him a tax-free agreement to set up a telecommunications company in Great Xia in the future. Merchants in this world had to pay taxes, and the same was true for telecommunications companies. This was especially true in 10 to 20 years when everything in Great Xia was stable. Given the population of Great Xia, it wasn't impossible for a few intelligent people to imitate and research telephones and switchboards. There weren't any before, but no one thought of it. 10 to 20 years would be enough for them to study the principles based on the real thing. At that time, this agreement would give the Royal Telecommunications Company a great advantage in the market. However, after thinking about it carefully, it wasn't very meaningful for him to have these little ideas with these people. This wasn't Earth, and it wasn't a world where everything was linked to economics. His goals were to explore the foreign races outside of the land of exile and explore this world. Qing Lian looked at Rinpoche and waited for a moment before asking, "What other requests do you have, your highness?" "Forget it, there's nothing else." However, it would not be possible in a short period of time. They did not have enough manpower. It should be at least a year later. Rinpoche calculated the time in his mind. "Although I don't know what you were thinking about just now, I think that you gave up on a request that was beneficial to you. Thank you very much, your highness." Qing Lian was very clever. Looking at Rinpoche's expression, she could roughly guess some things, but didn't know the specifics. Rinpoche pointed at her and said, "It's good that you know it. Don't act like you've gotten something good." Qing Lian chuckled and said again, "I don't think the laying of the circuit is complicated, and we can complete most of it ourselves. You only need to send a small number of people to assist. I believe that you can still send such a small number of people." Once again, Rinpoche felt that it was a pity for Qing Lian to follow those rebels to fight and kill. Even if such a talent wasn't sent to the research institute, she would still be a capable person in the imperial court. Currently, among the few students that he favored in the academy, none of them could compare to her in terms of knowledge or mind. What a pity. That's settled then. I'll send 10 people to assist you. Rinpoche nodded. Thank you, your highness. Qing Lian didn't look happy even though this trip was a success. In fact, she had never worried about this matter. Therefore, after the negotiation, Qing Lian said, "Previously it was official business. Now that it's done, I would like to congratulate your highness and the Empress of Dayo on the birth of a child." If it were anyone else, she would naturally try to get closer to them before talking about official business. In Qing Lian's mind, there was no need to do so. "I've obtained several ancient scrolls recently, and I've brought them with me as a congratulatory gift for the little princess." Rinpoche subconsciously asked, "Did you dig up graves?" Qing Lian covered her mouth and chuckled. "Your highness, you guessed it right. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising words." Chapter 10:14. Rinpoche carefully flipped through the ancient scrolls on the table. They were all bound with animal skin, and he couldn't tell what kind of animal skin it was made of. After so many years, they still hadn't been damaged at all. With just one glance, Rinpoche was sure that these scrolls came from an era without any records. The 2 records of the Earth Dragon were divided into 2 volumes, which mainly recorded some rare beasts, herbs, and ores. Only a few of these records were the same as the existing herbs and ores, and most of them were extremely rare and precious. The first was Records of the Water Dragon, which was similar to the Records of the Earth Dragon, but the former was for land, while the latter was for water. The last was Using Water to Bathe the Eyes, which seemed to be a special method for training the eyes. The few types of water that were needed were all recorded in Records of the Water Dragon. The name was simple, but the effect was great. It was said that after mastering it, one's eyesight could reach up to 1,000 miles, which was considered powerful. For the people of this world, the ability to see up to 1,000 miles was a fairly powerful training method. However, with binoculars this method wasn't very meaningful. What was really important were the 2 records of the Earth Dragon and records of the Water Dragon. Not only did they record the killers, herbs, and ores of the outside world, but there was also a small part of the water and mountain range map. It was of great significance for sending people to the outside world to find a hiding place to train. The previous phone call was only worth 200,000 taels of silver, but the value of these 3 books couldn't be measured with money. Where was the grave found? What's the situation inside? What else is there besides these? Rinpoche asked seriously. Under the ancestral grave of a rich family, there was a simple stone room. Apart from these ancient scrolls, there was only a skeleton. I also got someone to bury the skeleton properly. Qinglian smiled and said, I knew that you would be interested. You knew? Rinpoche asked. Ma Hongyu of the Empire, Su Gongso of the Sun and Moon in the Palm, Lin Dong of the Jingtian sect, and Gao Yi of the Spear. These famous experts have been very active recently. Qinglian pursed her lips. Rinpoche nodded slightly. The rebel army was now more powerful than the imperial court of Great Xia, and the movements of these experts inevitably reached their ears. Thank you very much. If there are similar things in the future. Rinpoche wanted to say that as long as he could afford it, he felt that it was too much. Got it? These things are useless in our hands. Besides, I'm also very curious about some things. If your highness acts quickly, I might be able to see them in my lifetime. Qinglian's expression finally changed a little when she said this. There was some anticipation, but there was also some sadness. Even if it was an ordinary person, after becoming a sword master, they could still become an expert. But the price was too heavy. They couldn't cultivate, and their lifespans were shorter than ordinary people. The lifespan of a sword master was usually only 60 or 70 years old. If they didn't fight often and had the support of resources, they might be able to live to 80 or 90 years old. This was their limit. Qinglian was already 27 or 28 years old. If there were no accidents, she would only have 40 to 50 years left to live. This was why she said that if he moved quickly, she might be able to see him. With her intelligence, she was able to obtain a lot of information from the Water Dragon record and Earth Dragon record. Combined with the movements of Ma Hongyu and the others, even if she couldn't guess the whole picture, she could at least guess half of it. The advent of the telephone had brought about a storm that swept through the Yun nation, and it was getting more and more intense. According to this era, the function of the telephone was comparable to that of a magical artifact. However, compared to those strange legends, the telephone was something that many people could come into contact with. Whether it was families, chambers of commerce, various departments in every city, or even many wealthy households, they began to plan whether or not to install a telephone at home. Even though there wasn't a need for it for the time being. Most people in this era still lived in their own land, and ordinary people couldn't even walk out of a radius of 50 kilometers. However, it was a worthwhile deal to show off and earn some face with a few dozen taels of silver. As a result, the craze brought about by the telephone never subsided. This craze also played a great role in the promotion of the telephone. Even if there was no need for any more publicity, the number of telephone users would steadily increase. While the craze for the telephone was still ongoing, a new product appeared in front of everyone. It was a cargo truck. It looked like a Jiefeng 141, but its performance was only equivalent to that of a standard World War II truck. It weighed 4,000 kilograms and carried 6,000 kilograms, which was slightly lower than a tractor. Furthermore, it had much higher requirements for roads than a tractor. With the exception of going up mountains and down to the sea, the tractor had excellent traffic performance in most places, which was something that a truck couldn't achieve. This was also the reason why Rinpoche brought out a tractor, as it was much more practical than a truck. It was expensive, had a low carrying capacity, and had high requirements for roads. Despite having so many flaws, one advantage overshadowed all of them: speed. It was twice as fast as a tractor and could reach 240 kilometers per hour, which was equivalent to 60 kilometers per hour. It would take 10 to 15 days to travel from Lan City to Pingdu with an ox cart, 3 days with a tractor, and 1.5 days with a truck. This alone attracted the attention of many merchants in the Yun nation. Furthermore, this new product called a truck was much more comfortable to ride in than a tractor. At least it had a driver's compartment that could shelter people from the wind and rain. Furthermore, it was more stable and not as bumpy as a tractor, which made people want to vomit. 2,000 of these trucks were ordered as soon as they were launched. Many people were even prepared to use this thing as a daily means of transportation. The only thing that limited the popularization of this truck was the roads. However, there was another piece of news that appeared along with the truck. It was to recruit more than 1 million laborers from the Yun Nation to build roads there. With the daily flow of caravans on the road from Lan City to the Yun Nation, a large number of materials were transported to both places. Lan City was becoming increasingly prosperous, and the prices were much lower than before. The proportion of the revenue from commercial taxes in the national treasury was increasing. Even Tu Wan, who was a stingy person, agreed with Ren Baqian, saying, "If you want to get rich, build roads first." There was another saying that Ren Baqian always said, "Have more children and plant fewer trees." Furthermore, with the salt and iron mines returned to the imperial court and the revenue from the Department of Commerce, the national treasury's revenue had increased several times compared to before. The batch of gold and silver that was plundered from the Yun Nation back then was still in the national treasury. Not only did it not decrease, but it was also increasing. As a result, there was no resistance in the imperial court to recruit laborers to build roads this time. It only took 3 days from the proposal to the agreement. The decree was passed down to all the cities in the Yun Nation. City commander, get ready. A decree has arrived. The city commander of Sanha City was resting in his residence. When he heard the report, he hurriedly put on his clothes and ran out. When he arrived at the city commander's residence, he saw 3 aboriginal men dressed as soldiers. "I'm Long Yuewu, the city commander of this city. Are the 3 of you here to deliver the decree?" "You are the city commander? Receive it." One of the burly men took out a roll of paper from his bag and stuffed it into Long Yuewu's hand. "The decree has arrived. We will leave now." The 3 of them didn't wait for his reply. It seemed that they didn't even consider that he would refuse this decree and were about to leave after delivering the paper. "If you have nothing important to do, why don't you rest in this city for a while?" Long Yuewu quickly asked. "I don't have the time. I still have to go to other cities." The 3 burly men didn't give him any face and turned to leave. Long Yuewu was moved. He didn't know why they still had to go to other cities. "These barbarians are very unreasonable," a young scholar said as he walked out from behind the door. "Don't let me hear the word barbarian ever again," Long Yuewu said unhappily. The scholar's expression changed slightly as he lowered his head and said, "It's a slip of the tongue. Furthermore, it might not be a bad thing for them to be like this," Long Yuewu added. Regardless of whether it was delivering a decree or something else, the news was delivered without any sloppiness. It wasn't like the Yun Nation, where if there was an envoy from the imperial court, they would not only receive him extravagantly, but they would also send gifts. Previously, he had been forced to become the city commander because he wanted to ensure the survival of the people in this city. As for what it felt like to be the city commander, he simply didn't dare to think too much about it. He didn't expect that after a few years, his position as the city commander would be so stable. Furthermore, the aboriginals wouldn't give him any trouble. It wasn't as chaotic as the Yun Nation, which saved him a lot of trouble. As such, he really liked the aboriginal style. Long Yuewu opened the scroll and glanced at it. His expression changed slightly. "Sir, what's the matter?" "This time, the imperial court wants to recruit 1 million laborers to build the official road." 1 million laborers. The scholar was also moved. "That's right. Our city needs 28,000 laborers," Long Yuewu said in a deep voice. The 2 of them weren't surprised by the number, but by the fact that it was actually labor and not corvée labor. One had to know that corvée labor didn't get paid. In previous years, corvée labor was used to build roads and cities. On the other hand, labor had to be paid. "Everyone gets 1 tael of silver a month," Long Yuewu said again. It wasn't a little but a lot. This was already the normal income of an ordinary citizen. Some of the poorer ones didn't even have this income. One had to know that this was labor, and every city had to provide a sufficient number of people. It was a little mandatory, and even 800 copper coins as a salary was a lot. 1 tael of silver as a salary and food was included. This treatment was simply generous. That was why the 2 of them were surprised. Long Yuewu had mixed feelings in his heart. When he took office as the city commander, he was prepared to be criticized in the back. In the end, after the aboriginals conquered the Yun Nation, not only did they not exploit him, but they also used conciliatory methods. Since they were conciliatory, there was no need for him to say or do much. He just had to follow the imperial court's orders. After a few years, he had gained some reputation. Long Yuewu thought about the Yun Nation's emperor who had favored Prime Minister Xan Yong, and the prime minister who had eliminated dissidents in the face of a great enemy, and he had mixed feelings. Long Yuewu rolled up the scroll and held it in his hand before instructing the scholar, "Go and summon the chief librarian and Minister Sima. First set a small goal. For example, remember in 1 second. Booksellers Mobile." Chapter 10-15. The recruitment of laborers went smoothly. The imperial court forcefully allocated the number of laborers to each city. There were more than 400 cities, and the smaller cities had to send more than 10,000 people while the bigger cities had to send 30,000 to 40,000 people. Although it would have a little impact on the cities, it wasn't a big deal. The Yun nation also had a population of nearly 100 million. This wasn't like sending able-bodied men to war. The wages were sufficient and there wasn't much backlash from the people. On the contrary, the wages were too generous and many people doubted whether they could really get it. As for the other classes such as scholars, wealthy families and merchants, they were happy to see this happen and were even looking forward to it. After all, after walking the road from Lan City to Pingdu, the road to the Yun nation was no different from a country road. In just 20 days, millions of laborers were recruited to start building the road to the Yun nation. The first was the road from Pingdu to Wangjing. After it was repaired, it would only take 2 days for tractors and 1 day for trucks to travel from Pingdu to Wangjing. In other words, with trucks, fresh seafood from the sea could be delivered to Lan City in 2.5 days. For the people of Dayo who had a hard time eating, this was an excellent thing. After all, as far as Rinpoche knew, there was kelp in this world, but the fishermen of the Yun nation didn't eat it. The various resources in the sea were also extremely rich. At present, the ingredients in the sea were what Rinpoche cared about the most. This was because he wanted to expand the planting area of soybeans and other oil crops that were used as raw materials for biodiesel. This would reduce the farming and grazing area in Dayo, which wasn't considered rich. In this case, the sea was an excellent source of food. Shaojiang Academy. The sound of people reading echoed in the academy. The sound of students reading had always been Ning Changqing's favorite. At this time, Ning Changqing, who was nearly 70 years old, was sitting in the courtyard with his eyes closed. He was listening to his favorite reading, but his eyebrows were furrowed. "Dean, we can't go on like this." Sitting not far away from him was a scholarly scholar who was about 50 years old. Amos replied softly, his eyes still closed. Shaojiang Academy was one of the top 5 academies in the Yun nation. For hundreds of years, there had been many important officials from the academy. There were 2 prime ministers. There were countless officials, big and small. Ever since the establishment of the Shaojiang Academy, it had emphasized, a good country should not nurture talents first. A way to nurture talents should not first encourage them to learn. When students entered the academy, they would be enrolled in different subjects according to their specialties. Not to mention whether they were willing to work for the Aboriginals or not, they didn't even have the opportunity to work for the Aboriginals. The Aboriginals didn't seem to care about them at all. However, looking at the Aboriginals' conciliatory behavior, they would rope in the scholars of the Yun nation sooner or later. They just had to wait. At the thought of this, the scholar felt extremely complicated. On one hand, Dayo was their enemy. On the other hand, the Yun nation was now under Dayo's rule. On the contrary, it wasn't as chaotic as before, and the people were living a better life than before. Just like the conscription in the past few days. If the Yun nation was still in power, they would probably become forced labor and end up in misery. Furthermore, the behavior of the Aboriginals in the past 2 years was completely different from the fierce and overbearing Aboriginals of the past. The 2 of them sat in the courtyard, each thinking of their own thoughts. At this moment, an old man rushed in and said, "Dean, something has happened." "What's the matter?" Ning Changqing opened his eyes. "Don't worry, speak slowly." Ning Changqing's eyes weren't muddy like an old man's. Instead, they were clear and intelligent. The old man took a deep breath and said, "A few Aboriginal soldiers are at the door and want to see you, Dean." Ning Changqing knocked on the armrest of the chair twice, stood up and walked out. "Dean, should we inform the others?" The scholar got up and followed behind him with a worried look. He didn't know what the Aboriginal soldiers were here for. "Don't alarm the others." Ning Changqing waved his hand. "Might not be a bad thing." A moment later, Ning Changqing arrived at the entrance of the academy. The old man didn't know the purpose of their visit and hurriedly ran to the academy to report the news before leaving them outside. Fortunately, they didn't look impatient. "Gentlemen, I'm the dean here. Sorry for the delay." Please come in and talk. There's no need. We'll give you the letter. We'll leave after you reply, said a woman in her 20s who was wearing armor. She took out a letter from her bosom and handed it to Ning Changqing. Gentlemen, please wait for a moment. Ning Changqing took the letter unhurriedly and opened it. He frowned, relaxed, frowned and relaxed again. The scholar beside him looked at his frown and felt like pressing his fingers to smooth it out. Please report to Zhao Prince Consort that I will bring the students of the academy for an exchange. Got it? The person turned and left. After the other person left, the middle-aged scholar asked, Dean, what kind of exchange? Ning Changqing's frown finally widened. Didn't I tell you to wait? You've waited. Ning Changqing continued, Zhao Prince Consort invited the students of the academy to visit Black Bamboo College for an exchange. That's what the letter said. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.